20 measures of grain, or next time, the copper axes will speak. That was how a foreign warrior robbed a tribe that had nothing to eat. And the father stood hunched and silent. But the boy whom fever had held for 3 days suddenly rose from his mat. He bowed to his father as no one here ever bowed, and he said, "Give me 3 days. I have thought of something." No one knew that inside that thin body there now lived an economist who had spent 10 years studying how the first markets were born. And he came to himself from pain, a dull, pressing pain, as if a stone had settled on his chest. Then a smell struck him, rancid fat, smoke, something sour. He breathes in and his body explodes in a wet cough that makes his ribs ache. He opens his eyes. Above him, a strange woman's face, dark circles under the eyes, cracked lips. The woman whispers that he had burned for 3 days, that she thought she would lose him, that the keeper of the hearth had heard her prayers. He wants to say that a mistake has been made, that his name is Daniel Cho, that he is an economist from Chicago, that he slipped on the stairs by the subway and struck his temple. But his throat will not obey. He lifts his palms to his face. Thin, dirty fingers with broken nails, wrists so narrow he can encircle them with 2 fingers. These are not his hands. From outside, a voice bursts in, fat, lazy, pleased with itself. The Enduri still owe 20 measures of grain. This is the last warning. Next time, the copper axes will speak. A second voice mutters in reply, quiet and pitiful. The woman flinches, turns away. Her shoulders shake. That is how people weep when they know no one will save them. Daniel closes the strange eyes, listens, thinks. 20 measures of grain, a threat of raid, a weak chief's voice. So this is not his father. This is the father of the boy whose body he has taken. A chief. A weak chief of a weak tribe. He looks at the ceiling, poles and reeds smeared with clay. Near the head of the bed, a pot with a pattern of cord impressions. Daniel had seen such pots in photographs and textbooks. The Bronze Age, late. He had spent 10 years studying how people in such a world built the first markets. He wrote 200 pages that 1,500 people read. And now he lies inside this world, in the body of a boy who nearly burned away from fever. And outside, a foreign warrior carries off grain the tribe does not have. Daniel sits up. The cough twists him again. The woman presses him back to the mat. He gently moves her hands aside, rises. His legs tremble. He grips the tent pole and steadies himself. A step. Another. He pushes aside the heavy flap. Light strikes his eyes. A yard, trodden earth, 3 huts, an empty goat pen. Beyond, 2 men stand, a stooped one with a gray beard, and a large one with a copper bracelet and a lazy smirk. Behind him, 4 men, with axes. The stooped one speaks quietly, almost pleading. The large one listens with the boredom of a cat deciding whether it is worth spending effort on a mouse. Daniel looks at the stooped man and understands. This is his father in this world, Chief Erden, the man who bought off raids 3 times, whom they laugh at around every fire from the river to the mountains. The large one notices the boy in the doorway. He snorts, tosses something to the warriors. They laugh. Erden turns. Fear flickers across his face. He waves his hand. Go away. Don't show yourself. Daniel does not leave. He stands and watches. And as he watches, his mind does what it does best. It counts. These men come not for grain. The grain is a pretext. Every raid delays the sowing. Every buyout shows the neighbors that the Anduri can be pressed further. They are not robbed of resources. They are robbed of time. They are robbed of information. The Kashgaru know how much grain the Anduri have left, and the Anduri know nothing about them. Asymmetry of information, first-year course. 2 warriors carry sacks out of the right hut. Shuen's mother grips him by the shoulder. whispers for him to go back inside, that he is still weak. Daniel covers her hand with his. She falls silent. He watches the sacks disappear onto foreign backs. 5, 6, 7. Each sack is someone's winter, some child who will not eat his fill. The large one raises a hand. Enough, for today. He throws Ordon something resembling a farewell, but in tone like a slap. Until the next moon. The 4 leave. Ordon stands alone in the middle of the yard, hunched. He does not turn around, cannot look in the eyes of those who watched. Daniel releases his mother's hand. 3 steps on buckling legs. He approaches his father. Ordon turns. His eyes are red, not from tears, from sleeplessness and shame and a weariness that has gathered over years. Daniel bows, low, both hands forward, the way one bows to an elder in Korea. Erdan blinks. The boy never bowed like that. No one in the tribe ever bowed like that. Daniel straightens and says quietly, "Father, give me 3 days. I have thought of something." Erdan looks for a long time. The boy before him is the same, thin, pale, with sunken eyes. But something has changed. In the way he stands, the way he holds his head. Erdan nods, and it is the first nod in 3 years that was not a sign of surrender. For 3 days, Daniel does not leave the hut. His mother brings him flatbread of coarse grain, water in a clay cup. He eats slowly and thinks. The body is a catastrophe. The muscles weak. The lungs clogged. Every deep breath answers with pain beneath the ribs. 16 years old, and the body already at the edge. If he does nothing, he will not live to 25. So everything he builds must work without him. Rule number 1. Rule number 2. No explanations. He cannot tell these people that he knows how the economy is arranged. The word economy does not exist here. Say something too clever and they will declare you a sorcerer or a madman. Here, every innovation must be wrapped in ritual, sanctified through the keeper of the word, made so that people think it is the will of the spirits and not the invention of a sick boy. Rule number 3. Begin small, with a concrete problem. And a problem exists. Grain rots. He recalls his dissertation, Chapter 4, The Granaries of and Lagash. Raised floors, ventilation through narrow slits, fired clay instead of raw, layers of herbs that repel insects. Wormwood. Wormwood grows here. He had seen it from the window. On the second day, he asks his mother to bring any boy who can run fast. His mother looks at him strangely, but brings one, a broad-faced, barefoot lad of about 12. Daniel sits him down beside him. Go to the border of the Kashgaru. Don't cross it. See where they store their grain, in pits or in huts. How many pits? Does it smell of rot? And come back. The boy runs off. He returns by the evening of the next day, out of breath, happy to have been given an important task. The Kashgaru store grain in pits, 6 pits by the river, without roofs. Water seeps from below. The smell is heavy. Half the grain is surely rotten. Daniel closes his eyes, smiles. There it is. There is his weapon. On the 3rd day, he goes to his father. His legs still tremble, but he walks on his own. Ordon sits by the hut sharpening a spear point, a meaningless occupation for one who long ago ceased to be a warrior. But the hands must be busy. Daniel sits down across from him. I need a feast. Ordon raises his eyes. A feast? Daniel nods. A feast for the elders of the Kashgaru, the very ones who took the grain 3 days ago. Invite them, with respect, with meat and barley drink. Urdan is silent. On his face, confusion and bitterness. The Kashgaru will laugh. They will think the Anduri have completely lost their pride. Daniel answers, "Let them laugh. Let them come and laugh. In one evening, he will make them stop." Urdan looks at his son for a long time, asks what he has in mind. "I will show them that we can give them more than they can take from us." Urdan does not understand, but he nods, because he has no other plan. Not one. A messenger goes to the Kashgaru that same evening, an invitation to a feast. The word of the keeper of the hearth that the guests will be safe. 2 days to prepare. Daniel spends them in motion. He goes around every hut, counts the sacks, climbs into every pit, sniffs, pours grain through his fingers, sorts it. In one pit, he finds what he was looking for, a batch of grain from last year's harvest. Grain the Kashgaru had left here after the raid before last. They did not bother to carry it. They decided it would rot. Daniel pulls out the living grains, separates them from the dead, sorts them by hand, sprinkles them with dry wormwood, puts them in a pot, and sets it in the shade. By the evening of the second day, he has a pot of clean, plump grain, the grain of the Kashgaru, preserved better than they preserve their own. The elders come, 3 of them. Gudea, the eldest, short, sturdy, with cunning eyes and a thick beard. Beside him, 2 younger men with axes at their belts. They sit by the fire, accept the food, eat unhurriedly. They look around with lazy contempt. A poor tribe, wretched huts, scrawny cattle. When they have finished, Urdan rises, says something ceremonial about the friendship of tribes, about common ancestors. His voice sounds uncertain. Gudea listens with boredom. And then Daniel rises. Everyone turns. A thin boy, the son of a weak chief. He sways slightly. But his voice is steady. He calls Gudea honored, says he wishes to propose a deal. Gudea raises an eyebrow. The young warrior snorts. Daniel continues. "I know how the Kashgaru store grain, in pits by the river, without roofs, water from below, rot. Every winter you lose 1/3 of your stores, perhaps more." Gudea stops smiling. The young warrior puts a hand on his axe. Daniel does not stop. The Enduri are building a new storehouse, with a raised floor, with fired walls, with herbs against insects. Grain lies in it 3 times as long. And here is the deal. The Kashgaru may leave their grain here, take it when needed. For storage, 1/10. If the grain spoils, the Enduri make it good from their own. Here is a tablet with the mark of Shounen and the mark of Chief Urdan. The witness will be Gudea himself. Silence. The fire crackles. Gudea looks at the boy for a long time. Then says, "The Kashgaru have no need of a boy's services." Daniel nods, waves a hand to his helper. The boy carries out the pot, sets it before Gudea, opens the lid. Grain. Plump, clean, golden. Without a musty smell. Without rot. Without weevils. Gudea takes a pinch, rubs it between his fingers, sniffs, puts it on his tongue. His face changes. He recognizes this grain. This is the grain of the Kashgaru, from the batch of the year before last. The grain his men abandoned in the Enduri's pit because they did not want to carry it. They decided it would rot. And it lay here, living, preserved by the hands of a boy who 3 days ago could barely rise from his mat. Gudea is silent. The young warriors are silent. Urdan does not breathe. Then Gudea laughs, quietly, shakes his head, calls Shuen a cunning pup, takes the tablet, turns it over, looks at the mark, presses his seal. A bone cylinder with a carved pattern. He presses it into the soft clay. Done. From this moment, the grain of the Kashkaru lies in the Endurese granary, their own grain, under their own seal. And that means one thing. There will be no raid this year. No one wrecks a storehouse that holds his own goods. Erdan looks at his son. For the first time in years, there is no shame on his face. There is something else. He does not yet know what to call it, but it is hope. Daniel sits back down. The cough twists him and he clamps his hand to his mouth. On his palm, pink saliva. He wipes his hand on the edge of his garment so no one sees. In his head, one thought drums. That was not even economics. That was first grade. The morning after the feast, Daniel stood by the pit he called a storehouse and looked at it with the eyes of a man who had read about the granaries of The pit was pitiful. 2 paces long, a pace and a half wide, the bottom damp, the walls crumbling. Above, a canopy of reeds that let the rain through. Here, grain lived a month. Then it began to die. He crouched, took a handful of earth from the bottom, damp, clayey, good clay, dense, exactly what was needed. He ran a finger along the wall of the pit. Thought. He needed a real granary. A raised floor so moisture would not rise from below. Walls of fired clay. A roof of reeds and clay in 3 layers. Separate cells for different goods. Grain apart. Wool apart. Copper apart. Layers of wormwood between the courses. He knew how to do it. He had seen the diagrams in textbooks. He knew the proportions. The problem was something else. Hands. His body could not lift anything heavier than a clay pot without breaking into a cough. He needed people, and the people had to be convinced. He went to his father. Erdan sat by his fire. After yesterday's feast, something in him had changed. He held himself a little straighter, looked a little higher. But when Daniel began to explain that he needed 20 men for 10 days to build a structure of clay, Erdan frowned. 20 men is almost all the men of the tribe. The preparation for sowing is underway. Every pair of hands counts. Daniel had expected this. He said, if we don't build the storehouse now, by winter we'll lose 1/3 of the harvest, as we lose every year, as we have lost 3 years running. 20 men for 10 days is 6 sacks of grain to feed them. But if the storehouse saves even 20 extra sacks, we get 14 sacks of clean profit. Erdan looked at him. The word profit he did not understand, but the numbers he understood. 20 sacks saved against 6 spent. He nodded. Daniel got his men. The first day of building nearly ended in a riot. The men came sullen and angry. They had been torn from the fields for a boy's whim. Among them was Karu, Daniel's great uncle, broad-shouldered, with a heavy jaw and eyes in which something unpleasant always smoldered. He stood off to the side with his arms crossed and watched. Did not help. Simply watched. Daniel felt his gaze like a stone between his shoulder blades. Karu dreamed of becoming chief. Everyone knew this. After Erdan's death, power was to pass to Shu-En. But Shu-En was a weakling, a sickly boy the tribe had already mentally buried. And now this boy had suddenly begun giving orders, building something, commanding grown men. Karu did not interfere. Yet. He waited for the boy to make a mistake. Daniel began with the layout. He measured out a plot 10 paces by 8, asked them to remove the top layer of earth, then began explaining about the floor. The floor must be raised, to knee height, of packed clay on a frame of poles. The men listened with bewilderment. One of them asked, why? Why raise the floor? Grain is stored in pits. Their fathers did it that way, and their fathers' fathers. Daniel looked at him. He could not say that he knew better, could not say that pits were an archaism that killed a third of the harvest, could not speak like a professor. He had to speak like a priest. He said that he had seen a dream. The keeper of the word had shown him a house for grain, a house where grain does not touch the earth, because the earth is greedy and takes the life from the grain. But if the grain is raised, it stays alive. The man blinked, looked at the others. A dream from the keeper of the word is a serious thing. One must not lie about such things. The punishment for lying about the keeper is worse than death. Either the boy speaks truth or he is mad. They began to dig. By the third day, the frame of the floor was ready, rough, a little crooked, but raised. Daniel walked around and corrected, showed where to pack tighter, where to set stones underneath. With his hands, he could not work. After an hour of walking, he would sit on the ground and breathe heavily. The cough came in waves, sometimes with blood. He hid it, wiped his mouth on the edge of his garment, and stood up again. On the fourth day, a girl came, small, about 15, with fingers caked in dried clay. She stood at the edge of the building site and watched. Not the storehouse, the tablets. Since morning, Daniel had been making clay tablets, small, flat pieces of clay, on which he pressed signs with a stick. The simplest marks. A line was a measure of grain, a circle a measure of wool, across a measure of copper. Beside them, a fingerprint, his way of keeping accounts. The girl looked at the signs, then came closer, closer still, sat down beside him on the ground, took a piece of wet clay and a stick, and repeated his signs, on the first try, clear, even a little better than his, because her fingers were used to clay. Daniel turned to her, asked her name, Geshti, the daughter of a potter. Her father had died the year before. Now she lived with distant relatives, worked, kneaded clay, made pots. No one had taught her anything else. Daniel looked at her tablets, then at her. He said, "Come tomorrow. I'll teach you new signs." She looked at him with round eyes, nodded, and ran off. Daniel watched her go and thought. In another life, he had recruited graduate students, looked at hundreds of applications and chose 2 or 3, those with a spark, whose hands thought faster than their heads. Geshti was the first, his first student in this world. On the 5th day, what he feared happened. Enkaru came to the building site, not alone, with 3 of the men most discontented of all. He stood before Daniel and spoke loudly, so that all could hear. He said the boy had taken men from the fields, that the sowing was being delayed, that if the harvest was poor, the one to blame would be the one who had pulled the workers away for his toy. He called the storehouse a toy. The men behind him nodded. Daniel stood and listened. His body wanted to retreat. The boy whose body he wore was used to retreating. But Daniel did not retreat. He turned to Enkaru and answered. Calmly, quietly. He said the uncle was right. The sowing was important. But he asked the uncle whether he remembered how many sacks of grain they had lost the winter before. Enkaru did not answer. Daniel answered for him. 32 sacks, rotted in the pits. Enough to feed 4 families, a whole winter. He asked whether the uncle remembered the widow Tina, whose son had died that winter, because there was not enough food, because the grain had rotted. Silence. Enkaru clenched his jaw. Everyone remembered the widow Tina. Everyone remembered her dead boy. Daniel did not press. He simply stood and waited. Enkaru turned and walked away. The men behind him exchanged glances, then returned to work. Daniel sat down on the ground because his knees would not hold him. His hands shook. Not from cold, from strain. The first clash with Enkaru, not the last. but he had withstood it. The storehouse was ready on the 10th day. It was ugly. Rough walls of sun-fired clay, a crooked roof, a low doorway. But the floor was raised, the walls were dry. Inside it smelled of wormwood, which Daniel had laid between the courses of clay. 4 separate cells: grain, wool, copper. The 4th empty, for the future. He stood before the storehouse and looked at it. One of the men muttered that it looked more like a dwelling for spirits than for grain. Daniel almost smiled. A week later, the grain of the Kashkaru was brought into this dwelling. Gudea sent 3 men with 10 sacks. They went inside, touched the walls, sniffed the air. One of them crouched and felt the floor, dry. Then they set down the sacks and left, in silence, without smirks. Daniel stood by the door of the storehouse and looked at the 10 foreign sacks. The enemy's grain lay under his roof, the simplest insurance contract in history, a deposit with a guarantee of return. Nothing new to the people of Babylon. But here it was the first time, and that changed everything. Now Daniel had to solve the next problem: measures. Every transaction in this world was a quarrel. One says my sack is heavier. Another says my lamb is fatter. No standard, no reference. Every trader lies, and every buyer suspects he is being cheated. Because he is being cheated. Always. He needed a reference stone. One stone of a definite weight, against which all others are compared. He found a stone by the river, smooth, dark, heavy, the size of 2 fists. Brought it into the storehouse. Now he had to tie its weight to something understandable. He poured grain into a sack, added handfuls until the sack weighed the same as the stone, counted the handfuls. 40 handfuls of grain. He named this one stone. 1 stone equals 40 handfuls of grain. Simple, clear, verifiable. Anyone could take the reference stone and check. Then, a vessel. He asked Geshti to make a pot of a definite size, exactly enough to hold 20 handfuls of water. Geshti made 3 identical pots. Identical. The potter's daughter's fingers worked more precisely than any tool they had. Daniel named this one vessel. 1 vessel, 20 handfuls of water. There remained a measure of length, and here he needed Ninsun. He knew of her, the daughter of the chief of a neighboring small tribe, allies of the Enduri. Tall, unusually tall for a woman. In a world where women are valued for modesty and being unobtrusive, her height was a curse. Too tall. No one would take her. Daniel asked his father to arrange a meeting with the chief of the allied tribe. Erdan agreed. 3 days later, the guests came. The measures appeared, but no one wanted to use them. Daniel had expected this. People do not change their habits because they have been shown a new tool. People change their habits when the old way causes pain that cannot be endured. He decided to wait. The chance came 5 days later. 2 men of the Enduri quarreled at the edge of the village. One was selling the other wool for grain. They had agreed by word of mouth. 2 sacks of wool for 3 sacks of grain. But when the time came for the exchange, the buyer said the seller's sacks were too small. The seller said the buyer's sacks were packed loosely. Both shouted. Both pulled the sacks toward themselves. Their wives stood behind them and shouted too. Children wept. Erdan came to settle the dispute, looked at the sacks, felt them, sniffed them, could not decide who was right. Said both should split the difference. Both left angry. Both believed they had been robbed. In the evening, Daniel went to the one who had been selling the wool, sat down beside him by the fire, said he knew a way so that such a thing would never happen again. The man looked at him with a sour face. Daniel said, "If you had weighed your wool on the reference stone before the deal, you would have known the exact weight, and the buyer would have known the exact weight, and there would have been no dispute. The man asked how he could know the reference did not lie. Daniel answered, "The reference lies in the storehouse, under the protection of the keeper of the word. Anyone can come and check it on any day. If the stone changes, it is an offense to the keeper, and for that, the whole tribe answers." The man was silent, thought, then said, "All right, I'll try." The next week, he came to the storehouse with a sack of wool and asked to have it weighed. Geshti took out the reference stone and a small balance Daniel had rigged from a stick and 2 pots on cords. Primitive, but working. The wool weighed 3 stones and a little more. Geshti recorded it on a tablet. 3 stones of wool, the seller's fingerprint, the date by the lunar count. The man left with the tablet. He showed it to the buyer. The buyer came to check, brought his grain, weighed it. 5 stones of grain. Geshti recorded a second tablet. They agreed on the spot. 3 stones of wool for 5 stones of grain. Both sides saw the numbers. Both sides saw the tablets. There was no dispute. 3 days later, another man came. Then 2 more. Then a woman. Then another woman. The women came more readily than the men. Daniel knew why. In this world, men traded and women watched. Men could lie to their wives about the price of a deal, say they had given up less than they really had, hide the difference. The women could not check. Now they could. A tablet with a fingerprint and a number. A wife came to the storehouse and asked Geshti. Geshti showed the record. The wife went home and asked her husband a question. The husband grew uncomfortable. Within a moon, almost everyone in the tribe was using tablets. Not because Daniel forced them, because the women forced them. The men grumbled, called it nonsense. But when a wife looks with that particular expression that means, "I know you lied," the grumbling quickly dies down. Daniel sat by the storehouse and looked at the stack of tablets. 23 of them in a month. Each one a transaction. Each one a record. Each one a small brick in the foundation of something larger. He had taught Geshti 6 basic signs: grain, wool, copper, fish, number, name. The name was recorded with a fingerprint. Primitive, but enough. Geshti grasped everything instantly. She did not just copy, she improved. Her signs were cleaner, smoother. She herself thought of a way to fire the tablets on coals so they hardened but did not crack. Daniel looked at her and saw a future scholar, a person who had had the misfortune to be born into a world where an orphan girl's fate was to be a junior wife in a foreign tribe for a sack of grain. He was thinking about this when his mother came to him. She sat down beside him, was silent, then said that someone had come for Geshti, the relative she lived with. They had agreed to give her to Lugal Im as a junior wife to a shepherd for 2 sacks of barley. Daniel froze. 2 sacks of barley? The price of a person. The price of a girl whose fingers could change this world. He rose, went to his father, spoke quickly, hotly. His body shook with coughing, but he did not stop. He said Geshti was needed by the tribe, that without her the tablets would not work, that she was worth not 2 sacks, but 200. Erdan listened, frowned, asked why he needed this girl. Daniel answered, "Because she is the only one in the tribe who understands the signs faster than I can draw them. Because within a year she will keep all the records of the Enduri. Because without her, the storehouse will turn back into a pit." Erdan looked at his son for a long time, then nodded. Summoned Geshti's relatives, said the girl would stay, that the chief was taking her under his protection. The relatives began to argue. Erdan raised his voice, for the first time in a long while. He said the decision had been made. The relatives left, angry. 2 sacks of barley slipped from their hands, but Geshti stayed. That evening, she sat by the storehouse and made tablets. Her hands moved smoothly and quickly, but Daniel noticed that she did not raise her head. He sat down beside her, said nothing, just sat. After some time, she said quietly that she had been afraid, that she had thought they would take her away and she would never see the signs again. Daniel answered one thing: "You will stay. You will teach others. In 3 years, you will be the most important person in this storehouse." She looked at him. Her eyes shone. She said nothing, just went back to the tablets, and the signs on them grew even smoother. Another week passed. The time came for the first caravan. Daniel had been thinking about it from the first day. The storehouse and the measures were the foundation. But a foundation without walls is useless. He needed trade. Not random, not spontaneous. Planned. With reconnaissance. With information. He gathered 4 young lads, the ones no one took, neither for the hunt nor for the plowing. Too thin, too fast, too talkative, useless by the tribe's measure. Daniel looked at them and saw ideal scouts. He told them, "Go south to Lugal-Im. Do not trade. Just look. Count. How many sheep do they have? Of what age? How much wool do they shear? How much grain do they grow? Do they have what we do not? Do they lack what we have? Remember everything. Come back in 10 days." The lads exchanged glances. One of them asked why. Daniel answered, "Because the one who knows more always wins in trade." They left. Daniel stood and watched them go. The first reconnaissance caravan. Without goods, without weapons, only eyes and ears. Information as a commodity. First year course. Chapter 3. While the scouts were on the road, Daniel turned to another problem: the keeper of the word. In every tribe, there was a man called the keeper of the word. His task was simple: to remember. To remember who had promised what to whom. To remember the oaths given by the fire. To remember debts and obligations. The keeper of the word of the Endori was an old man named Zababa. He was no less than 50 years old, a vast age for this world. He sat by his fire with closed eyes and muttered. He remembered everything, every oath of the last 30 years, every debt, every promise. His memory was flawless. But he was alone, and he was old. When he died, his memory would die with him. Everything he remembered would vanish. All the debts, all the promises, everything would return to zero. Daniel came to Zababa, sat across from him. The old man opened one eye, looked at the boy, closed it. Daniel spoke, carefully, respectfully. He said he admired the keeper's memory, that no one in the tribe did what he did. But he asked, what will happen when the keeper goes to the ancestors? Who will remember what he remembers? Zababa opened both eyes, looked at Daniel, was silent. Daniel went on. He said there was a way to preserve the keeper's words forever, on clay, on fired clay that does not rot and does not forget. Every oath, every debt, every promise recorded, with the marks of both parties and the mark of a witness. Even after the keeper's death, the words would live. Zababa looked at him. His face was impenetrable. Then he said, "You want to replace me with clay?" Daniel shook his head. He said, "No. Clay will not replace the keeper. Clay will serve the keeper, as his helper, as his second voice. When someone comes and says he gave no oath, the keeper will show the tablet, and the dispute will end. Not word against word, but word against clay. And clay does not lie." Zababa was silent for a long time. Then he extended his hand, asked to see. Daniel took out a tablet, showed the signs, explained. Zababa took the tablet, turned it in his hands, touched the fingerprint, held it to the light, then nodded. One nod, slow, heavy. like a stone falling into water. From that day, Zababa was an ally. This changed everything. The Keeper of the Word was a sacred figure. His support meant that the tablets were no longer the invention of a sick boy. They were the Keeper's instrument, part of the ritual, part of the order of things. No one could stand against the tablets without standing against Zababa. And to stand against Zababa meant to stand against all the oaths he kept, against the entire order of the tribe. The scouts returned on the 9th day, tired, dusty, but with burning eyes. They sat by the storehouse and began to tell. The Lugal Im are rich in cattle, 200 head of sheep, many goats, but they had a bad year for wool. The sheep had sickened in winter. The wool was short and weak. They needed good wool for clothing and rope. And they had a surplus of copper nuggets from the mountain streams. They traded copper for grain with the mountain clans, but the trade was unfavorable because the Highlanders knew the Lugal Im needed grain and drove up the price. Daniel listened, absorbed every word. Wool. The Enduri had wool. Not much, but it was good, long, strong. The Enduri's sheep were small, but their wool was prized. Copper. The Lugal Im had copper. The Enduri needed copper for tools. The exchange was obvious, wool for copper. But the exchange had to be right, on the Enduri's terms, with the Enduri's measures, on the Enduri's territory. Daniel drew up a plan. 10 bundles of wool, 3 stones each. Total weight, 30 stones. By the scouts' information, wool at Lugal Im was worth twice the usual because of the shortage. So 10 bundles of wool could be exchanged for copper that in normal times would cost 3 times more. He smiled. Arbitrage. The simplest arbitrage. The difference in prices between two markets. Child's course. The caravan set out 3 days later. 6 men, 2 mules, 10 bundles of wool. Each bundle weighed on the reference stone and recorded on a tablet with Geshti's mark. Daniel did not go himself. His body would not allow it. He stood by the gate and watched the caravan head south. Beside him stood Ninsun. She had come 3 days before and stayed. She did not explain why. She simply stayed, stood by the storehouse, watched the work, helped Geshti carry the heavy pots. Sometimes caught the men's glances. They looked at her height and looked away. She was used to it. But here her height was not a deformity. Here her height was a measure, the cubit of Ninsun. She stood beside Daniel and watched the caravan go. He said to her quietly, "If they come back with copper, it will change everything." She answered that copper was just copper. He shook his head, said that copper was not the main thing. The main thing was that they left with numbers and would return with numbers. And everyone would know exactly how much they gave and how much they got, and no one could cheat. She looked at him, from above down, a thin boy with eyes in which something burned that she had no name for. She turned away, but did not leave. The caravan returned in 8 days, with copper, 15 ingots of irregular shape, 3 times more favorable than any deal the Enduri had ever made. 6 men entered the village and laid the copper out before the storehouse. People gathered around. The copper lay in the storehouse. 42 stones. Daniel looked at the ingots and thought of what no one else saw. Copper is not just metal. Copper is tools. Tools are work. Work is harvest. Harvest is food. Food is lives. The chain he had seen in textbooks. A chain these people felt but could not name. He distributed the copper. 4 ingots to the smith for pneumatic blades, 2 ingots for repairing kettles, 1 ingot set aside for Geshti for new seals, the rest into reserve. Each ingot recorded, each weighed, each on a tablet. The smith Tabshar came to take his share and looked at the tablet with the mark, turned it in his hands, asked what he needed a piece of clay for. Daniel answered, "So that in a moon, no one says you received 5 ingots and not 4, or that you received 3 and not 4. The smith thought, nodded, took both the ingots and the tablet. The first winter was approaching. The nights grew colder. The wind from the north carried the smell of dry grass and dust. The third dry year. The harvest was meager, but thanks to the storehouse, the grain did not rot. Every sack in its place, every one recorded. Daniel counted the stores every 5 days. Geshti helped. Her fingers flew across the tablets. She already knew 12 signs. She invented the 13th herself, a sign for dried fish. Daniel looked at it and nearly laughed. She had created a new ideogram. A 15-year-old orphan had created a written sign because it was inconvenient for her to record fish with a long description. He approved. The sign for dried fish entered the system. In the 3rd week before the winter solstice, what Daniel had foreseen but hoped to postpone happened. Strangers came to the storehouse. 3 men from a small tribe that lived beyond the hills to the east, hungry, thin. Their chief had sent them with a request. Grain. 10 sacks. They would return it in spring. Urdan gathered the elders. The usual answer was simple. No. There was little food. Let the strangers starve. Daniel asked to speak. The elders looked at him with irritation. The boy again. He spoke, quietly, slowly, each word separate. He said that 10 sacks was a lot, but if they were given against a written pledge with return in spring and an addition of 2 measures for each sack, the tribe would not lose but gain. 10 sacks would go, 12 would return, 2 measures of pure addition, for the grain simply lying with someone else until spring. The elders were silent. Enkaru snorted, said the grain would go and not return, that the strangers would cheat, that a tablet could not replace an oath by the fire. Daniel answered, a tablet will not replace an oath. A tablet will supplement the oath. Let them give an oath by the fire before the keeper of the word, and let Zababa record the oath on a tablet, with the marks of both parties. If they break it, the keeper of the word will tell of it at every fire as far as the mountains. Their name will be dirt. No one will trade with them, ever. That is worse than hunger. Zababa nodded from his corner, a slow, heavy nod. The elders exchanged glances. Erden looked at his son, then at Zababa, then at the tablet in Geshti's hands, and nodded. The grain went, 10 sacks. A tablet with a double mark stayed in the storehouse. 3 months of anxious waiting. Every morning Daniel woke and the first thing he did was count the sacks. Then he looked at the sky. Then he coughed into a rag. His body grew worse. The winter cold gnawed into his lungs. At night he woke because he could not breathe. His mother sat beside him and held his hand. She said nothing. She was simply there. He lay in the dark and thought. He knew what was happening. Tuberculosis, or something like it. In this world, there are no medicines, no antibiotics, nothing but herbal decoctions that do not help. He needed a healer, a real one. Someone who knew herbs better than the local wise women with their ritual dances. She came in the 4th month of winter, alone, on foot, with a sack on her back and a staff in her hand. A woman of about 24, short but upright, with narrow eyes and thin hands. The people of the tribe looked at her with suspicion, a stranger, from the mountain clans, from those they called people of narrow eyes and thin hands. She approached the storehouse, looked at the walls, at the roof, at the tablets by the entrance, then asked who was in charge here. Geshti pointed to Daniel. He sat by the wall, wrapped in a wool blanket, coughing. The woman came up, sat across from him, looked at him for a long time, then said, "You are dying." Daniel looked at her, answered that he knew. She nodded, said her name was Mei Hyun, that she was a healer, that she had come because she had heard of a chief who does not lie on tablets. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. Daniel asked what she needed. She answered simply, a place, protection, the right to trade her remedies. In exchange, she would heal. Daniel coughed, asked whether she could cure him. Mei-hyun looked at his chest, asked him to remove his garment. He did. She pressed her ear to his back, listened, then straightened, said his lungs were bad, that a full cure was impossible, but slowing it was possible. If he drank her decoctions every day and slept with dry wormwood at his head and did not walk in the cold without warm clothing. Daniel nodded, asked her price. She said, a share in the caravan, like everyone, and the right to record her recipes on tablets so they would remain when she was gone. Daniel froze. This woman, from a mountain clan with Korean roots, who had come on her own, who had heard of the tablets and wanted to record knowledge on them. She understood what the elders did not. Knowledge that is recorded does not die with the person. He extended his hand. She shook it. A brief handshake, businesslike, like a contract. Mei-hyun began with his lungs, a decoction of mountain wormwood and 3 other herbs Daniel did not know. So bitter that the first sip brought tears to his eyes. She made him drink it 3 times a day. Within a week, the cough grew less frequent. Within 2, he slept through the night for the first time in months without waking. She did her work in silence, did not boast, did not demand thanks, simply healed. Daniel noticed something else. She sang. In the evenings, quietly, in a language no one in the tribe knew. But Daniel knew it. Separate words, fragments, familiar sounds. Korean. Ancient, distorted, passed through dozens of generations, but Korean. He lay in the dark and listened, and his heart clenched with something like longing for a home that no longer exists. Winter dragged on. The storehouse held. The grain was dry and clean. Every 10 days, Daniel sent a runner boy to the Kashgaru to report that their grain was in order. Gudea sent thanks in return, not in words. A bundle of dried meat or a pot of butter. Small gifts that meant a great deal. They meant that Gudea remembered, that the agreement worked, that trust was growing. Enkaru watched, in silence. He came to the storehouse and stood off to the side, counted the sacks with his eyes. Daniel felt his presence like a chill at his back. Enkaru did not attack, did not argue, just waited. As a hunter waits for the prey to make a mistake. In the 6th week of winter, the mistake happened. Not Daniel's, the helper boy's. He confused the tablets and gave out to the strange tribe from beyond the hills 2 sacks of grain that were recorded as the grain of the Kashgaru. A mistake. Foolish. Small. But dangerous. Because the grain of the Kashgaru was the grain of the Kashgaru. It could not be touched, could not be moved, could not be given to anyone else. That was the basis of the agreement, the basis of the trust. Daniel learned of the mistake in the evening when Geshti came with wide eyes and trembling hands. She showed the tablets. A discrepancy. 2 sacks were on the Kashgaru tablet, but were not in the storehouse. Daniel closed his eyes. 3 seconds. Then opened them. Told Geshti to take 2 sacks from the Enduri's stores, their own. Mark them as the sacks of the Kashgaru. Put them in place. Immediately. Geshti nodded and left. Within an hour, the sacks were in place. The records corrected. The tribe had lost 2 sacks from its own already meager stores, but the agreement was saved. Daniel found the helper boy, did not shout, did not strike, sat down beside him and explained, slowly, what had happened, what could have happened. That if the Kashgaru had learned of the substitution, the agreement would have collapsed, and the raid would have come in winter, when there is nowhere to flee. The boy sat white as clay, trembling. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder, said that mistakes happen. What matters is not that you erred. What matters is what you do after the error. The boy nodded. From that day, he checked every tablet 3 times. Enkaru found out. Of course he found out. He came to Daniel at night, alone, sat across from him by the fire, looked at his nephew, and spoke. Quietly, without malice, almost as a friend. He said he knew about the 2 sacks, that the boy had babbled to someone who told his wife who told her sister. He said he could send a messenger to Gudea and tell him. Spring came quietly. The snow on the mountain peaks began to melt, and the rivers swelled with muddy water. The earth softened, the air grew warmer. Daniel stood by the river and looked at the water. His breathing was steadier than in winter. Mei Hyun's decoctions worked. The cough had not gone, but it grew less frequent. He could walk from the storehouse to the river without stopping. A small victory. Plans turned in his head. The winter had ended, and the Enduri had survived. Not just survived. They had earned. 2 sacks of addition from the loan. Gifts from Gudea for storing the grain. Copper from the caravan to Lugol Im. All recorded. All counted. Now the next step was needed. Expansion. He turned and walked to the storehouse. At the storehouse, they were already waiting. 4 young scouts sat on the ground eating flatbread. Ninsun stood by the wall, sharpening a knife on a stone. Geshti laid out tablets on a dry cloth. Mei Hyun sorted herbs in a corner. His team. Gathered over half a year from people no one valued. Scouts thought too thin for war. An orphan girl they wanted to sell. A foreign healer. A woman shamed for her height. Daniel sat down and began to speak. He said the winter had shown the main thing. The system worked. But it was too small. 1 storehouse, 1 caravan, 1 trading partner. That was enough to survive, but not enough to grow strong. He needed 3 caravans. South to Lugol Im, east to the mountain clans, and north to the small steppe tribes. 3 directions, 3 routes, 3 sources of information. But for that, people were needed. More people. Scouts, tally keepers, guards. Ninsun raised her head, said she knew people in her tribe. Young lads tired of herding other men's goats who would want real work. Daniel nodded, said he would take them, on conditions. They must learn the measures. They must be able to count to 100. They must know the basic signs on the tablets. Ninsun raised an eyebrow, asked who would teach them. Daniel looked at Geshti. Geshti froze with a tablet in her hand. Her eyes grew large. He said, "You." A week later, 8 people sat in the storehouse. 5 teenagers from the Enduri and 3 from Ninsun's tribe. Geshti stood before them with a writing stick and a piece of wet clay. She taught them the signs, slowly, patiently, 1 sign per lesson. Grain, wool, copper, fish, number, name. She was strict, stricter than Daniel had expected. If someone made a sign unevenly, she made him redo it 5 times, 10, until it came out right. One of the teenagers complained that this was boring. Geshti looked at him and said, "A crooked sign on a tablet is a crooked count. A crooked count is a cheat. A cheat is lost trust. Lost trust is hunger in winter. Choose." The teenager fell silent and began to redo the sign. Daniel sat in a corner and watched. In another life, he had seen dozens of teachers, good and bad. Geshti was of the kind born once in a generation. She did not just know the material, she knew how to make others want to know it. This was the first school, without walls, without a roof. On the floor of the storehouse beside the sacks of grain and the ingots of copper. 8 students, 1 teacher. They were laughed at. Men passed by and snickered. Women's work, clay toys, playing at writing. Daniel paid no attention. He knew that within a year, each of these students would be worth more than a warrior. Because a warrior can kill one enemy, but a person who can count and record can save a whole tribe from being cheated. Among the students was one special one, Nanaya, the daughter of Gudea of the Kashgaru. She had arrived a month before, officially as a pledge of friendship between the tribes, a hostage. In fact, Gudea simply did not know what to do with her, a girl who asked too many questions, who counted faster than the adults, who wore everyone around her out with her curiosity. Gudea decided that she had better wear out the Enduri. Nanaya came and in the first evening counted all the sacks in the storehouse, 47. Faster than Geshti, faster than Daniel. She counted in her head with such speed that Daniel stopped and looked at her the way one looks at a calculator that has just appeared in an era of counting by hand. He said to Geshti, "Teach her everything. In 3 years, she will go home and teach her own people." Geshti nodded. Nanaya beamed. The first spring caravan went east, to the mountain clans. Daniel sent 6 men with a load of dried fish and grain. The fish had been caught all winter in the river under the ice, dried in the wind, every bundle recorded. The mountain clans needed fish and grain. They had stones, obsidian, black volcanic stone sharp as a razor. They made knives and points from it that were valued above copper. The exchange was to be favorable. Daniel again sent scouts ahead of the caravan. They returned with news. The mountain clan called Tishan had a surplus of obsidian, but a shortage of everything else. The drought had reached the mountains, too. The streams had grown shallow. The crops had dried up. They were in desperate need. Daniel calculated the exchange, fish and grain for obsidian, by the Onduri's measures. On the Onduri's tablets, the caravan went. Daniel stood by the gate and again could not go with it. While the caravan was on the road, something happened that Daniel had not planned. A woman came to the Onduri, a widow from the Kashgaru, with 2 children, barefoot, filthy, with empty eyes. Her husband had died in winter. She had walked 2 days. The children could barely stand on their feet. A guard stopped her at the gate, called the elders. The elders gathered, looked at her. A stranger, a widow, from an enemy tribe. By all the laws of the region, she should be driven off, or at best, taken as a slave. Enkaru stood in the first row, arms crossed, a stony face. He said strangers had no place here, that there was barely enough grain for their own, that every mouth was a sack less by winter. The elders nodded. The logic was simple and cruel. Daniel came out of the storehouse, slowly, leaning on the wall. The cough twisted him halfway and he stopped, spat, straightened, reached the circle of elders. Everyone turned to him. He looked at the widow, then at the children. A boy of about 5, a girl a little older, eyes like hunted beasts. He asked what her husband had been called. She answered, Bar-Shim. Daniel turned to Geshti, who stood behind his shoulder, said, "Find the tablets from the autumn caravan." Bar-Shim. Geshti went into the storehouse, returned within a minute with 2 tablets. Daniel took them, looked, showed the elders. Bar-Shim of the Kashgaru. Last year he brought wool for storage, 3 bundles. He took part in the autumn caravan, contributed 1 bundle of wool. The caravan returned with a profit. Bar-Shim's share, 3 measures of grain and 1 measure of copper. The share was not paid out because Bar-Shim did not come for it. He died. But the share exists on a tablet with a mark. Daniel turned to the widow, said her husband had invested in the caravan, that he had a share, 3 measures of grain and 1 measure of copper. It is hers, by right. He turned to Geshti, said, "Pay it out." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the wind stopped. The widow stood and looked at the boy who had just said that her dead husband had something left in this world, that his work had not perished, that someone remembered. She sank to her knees, not from weakness, from the fact that her legs ceased to hold her. Geshti carried out the grain and a small copper ingot, laid them before her. 3 measures of grain, that is 3 months of life for 3 people. 1 measure of copper, that is a knife or a pot or part of a dowry for a daughter. The widow looked at the grain and could not take it. Her hands would not obey. The boy came up and tugged his mother by the sleeve. "Mama, Mama, food!" She raised her hands, took the sack, pressed it to her chest, and wept. The elders were silent. Daniel stood and waited. He did not look at the widow. He looked at the elders, at their faces, at how it dawned on them. Slowly, heavily, like sunrise on an overcast day. They had built not a storehouse, not trade, not a system of accounts. They had built memory, a tribe that remembers who did what, a tribe people come to, a tribe people want to come to. Because here, a dead husband still has a share. Because here, a widow does not die of hunger in winter. Because here, a clay tablet keeps what people forget. Enkaru stood off to the side. His face was turned away from everyone. He looked off into the distance. Daniel saw how his lower jaw twitched, only for a second. Then his face became stone again. But that second had been. It had been. After the widow left, Erdan came to Daniel. The father stood beside him and was silent. Then said one word. "How? How did you know it would work?" Daniel answered, "I didn't know, but I knew that if we drive off a widow with children, then in 10 years, when our widows come to foreign gates, they too will be driven off. But if we give her what belongs to her by the tablet, then in 10 years, our widows will be safe at any gates, because everyone will know. The Enduri remember." Erdan looked at his son, then did what Daniel had not expected. He embraced him, briefly, awkwardly, the way men embrace who have forgotten how to do it, and walked away. Daniel stood alone, his throat tightened, not from the cough, from something else. The caravan returned from the east in 12 days, with obsidian, 20 blades, black, gleaming, sharp. Each recorded on a tablet, each weighed. The exchange was 3 times more favorable than expected, because the mountain clan was in desperate need, and the Enduri came first, before others. Because they knew. Because the scouts had brought the information before anyone else got it. Information outran goods, and this gave the Enduri an advantage in every deal. Daniel distributed the obsidian, 5 blades to the smith for tools, 3 blades into reserve, 12 for sale in the next caravan. Obsidian from the mountains was worth twice as much on the plain as in the mountains. Another arbitrage, another difference in prices. He sat by the storehouse and counted, on a tablet, with a stick in the clay. If 3 caravans a year brought such profit, then in 2 years the Andari would be richer than the Kashgaru. Not in warriors, not in cattle, in stores, in connections, in information, in trust. And that was more terrible to the neighbors than any army. But fear breeds danger. Daniel knew this. He sat by the fire in the evening and listened as the scouts told of what they had seen in the mountains. One of them said the mountain clan Tish-On had asked about the tablets, asked a great deal. How they work, why the Andari record everything. Another scout added that he had seen strangers, 2 of them, not from the mountain clan, not from the steppe tribes, foreign. They were among the Highlanders and asked questions about the boy chief from the river bend, about the boy who turns grain into copper without fire. Daniel went cold. Rumors were spreading faster than he had reckoned. His success drew attention, and attention in this world is not subscribers and not citations. It is men with axes who want to take what they cannot understand. He looked at Ninsun. She sat nearby and listened with an impassive face. Looked at Geshti, who by the firelight was making yet another tablet. At Mei Hyun, who sorted herbs in her corner. These people depended on him. Everything he had built depended on him. And he was a thin boy with sick lungs who could not lift an axe. He needed protection, not an army. He could not afford an army, but something else. A guard, professional, for the caravans and the storehouses. People who protect not a tribe, but a system. He needed Enitu. Enitu worked quickly. In 10 days, she gathered 6. Not warriors. There were almost no warriors among the Enduri. She took those she could find. 2 shepherds who could throw stones from a sling. 1 fisherman with hands like tree roots. 2 boys from Geshti's students who were too restless for tablets but too clever for the field. And 1 woman, a widow named Kiana. Thin, sinewy, with dead eyes. Her husband had been killed in the last raid of the Kashgaru 2 years before. She had come to Enitu herself and said she wanted to stand between her own and the strangers, that no one else would die before her eyes without her being able to do something. Enitu looked at her and nodded, without extra words. They began to train. Every morning on the wasteland behind the storehouse, Enitu drove them to exhaustion, running, throwing stones, striking with sticks, working with a knife, not killing. Defense. Daniel watched and saw that she was building not a band of warriors, but a group of deterrents. People who look dangerous, who move with confidence, who stand so that anyone meeting them loses the desire to test how dangerous they really are. A professional guard, not an army. The difference is subtle but fundamental. An army seeks battle. A guard makes it so there is no battle. The second spring caravan went south to Lugal Im, for the first time with a guard. Enitu sent 3, the shepherd slinger and 2 boys. They walked along the sides of the caravan with stony faces and slings on their shoulders. The caravan carried obsidian from the mountains, 12 blades. In the mountains, each was worth a sack of grain. On the plain at Lugal Im, each was worth 3 sacks. Or 2 ingots of copper, or 5 bundles of wool. The scouts went ahead and returned with news. The Lugal Im wanted obsidian. Their smith had asked for the black stone since last year. They were ready to pay generously. The caravan returned in 9 days, with 30 bundles of wool and 8 ingots of copper. Daniel stood by the storehouse and counted. 12 obsidian blades had cost the Enduri 12 sacks of grain and fish. 30 bundles of wool and 8 ingots of copper returned. A 5-fold profit. He recorded everything on a tablet, showed the elders. They looked at the numbers and could not understand where the surplus came from. One of them asked whether it was sorcery. Daniel answered that the sorcery was to buy where it is cheap and sell where it is dear. The elder blinked. The rest laughed. The first time his words were laughed at not with malice, but with pleasure. But fortune drew attention. In the 3rd week of spring, guests came to the Enduri, not from neighboring tribes, from afar. 3 men, expensive clothing, fine cloth, copper bracelets with a pattern Daniel had not seen before. They called themselves merchants from the southern marshes, said they were looking for trading partners, that they had heard of the Enduri's storehouse and would like to see it. Erdan received them with honor, a feast, meat, barley drink. Daniel sat in a corner and watched. He looked not at the faces, he looked at the hands. The hands of one of the guests were calloused, but not from work in the field. Calluses in the wrong places. Between the thumb and the forefinger. Calluses from a weapon, not from tools. This man was not a merchant. He was a warrior pretending to be a merchant. Daniel caught the eye of Leah-sun. She had come to the Enduri 2 weeks before, a former captive bought back from the Kashgaru for 2 measures of copper. Daniel had insisted on the ransom, explaining to his father that she knew 3 languages and the count of the mountain tribes. Erdan did not understand why he needed a woman who knew 3 languages, but he had grown used to not understanding his son's decisions. Leah-san sat by the wall, quiet, with a scar through her eyebrow. Her eyes moved from one guest to another. She too had noticed the hands. When the feast ended and the guests went to sleep, she came to Daniel, said quietly, "2 of them are not merchants. The 3rd might be, but 2 are certainly not." She had seen such men in captivity among the Kashgaru. Spies. They come to look before a raid. They count the people, count the cattle, count the sacks. Then they leave and within a moon come back with axes. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat by the fire and thought. Spies. From where? From the south. From the southern marshes. The only power in the south he had heard of was a man whispered of as a king. Not a real king, not with a crown and a palace. A war leader who had united several marsh clans and begun expanding, slowly, methodically, swallowing small tribes one after another. Daniel had heard fragments from the scouts, a name, Naram Esh. It sounded heavy, like the blow of an axe against wood. This Naram Esh had sent eyes, to look at the boy who turns grain into copper without fire. In the morning, Daniel made a decision. He did not drive the guests out, did not show that he knew. Instead, he did what he did best, showed them exactly as much as he wanted. He led them through the storehouse, showed the sacks, showed the cells, showed the tablets, but not all the tablets, the accounting tablets with the marks he had removed. He left only those describing the kinds of goods and the measures. Let them see that we can store. Let them not see how many connections we have. Let them not see who our partners are. Let them not see the scale. He showed them the granary of a small, poor tribe that had learned not to spoil its grain. Nothing more. The spies walked, nodded, touched the walls, asked polite questions. Within 2 days, they left. Daniel stood by the gate and watched them go. Beside him stood Initu with a knife at her belt. She said she could catch up with them. Daniel shook his head, said that to kill a scout meant to confirm that there was something here to hide. Let them go. Let them tell. Let Naram Esh think the Enduri were a small, poor tribe with a good granary, nothing more. It would buy time. Not much, but enough. Initu looked at him. For the first time, something like respect flickered in her eyes. Daniel gathered a council, not the elders, his council. Ninsun, Geshti, Leah-sun, Meihyun, Initu. 5 women, not a single man besides himself. He grinned to himself. The faculty council of an economics department was 90% men. His council in the Bronze Age was 100% women. The irony. He laid out a plan before them. On a clay tablet the size of 2 palms, a schematic map, the river, the bend, the Enduri in the center, the Kashgaru to the north, Lugal Im to the south, the mountain clans to the east, the steppe tribes to the west, and far to the south an arrow. Naram Esh, he said. We need allies. Not military allies, trading allies. If Naram Esh comes for us, he comes for one small tribe. But if we bind 4 or 5 tribes to us by trade, he comes for all of them. And fighting all of them is expensive, even for a king. Ninsun asked how to bind them by trade. Daniel answered, common measures, common tablets, common rules. If everyone trades by the same measures, then everyone depends on each other. If one attacks, the rest stop trading with him, and he starves. Lia-san leaned forward. Her eyes shone. She said she knew the mountain clans, that 3 of them were already on the edge of hunger, that they needed help, and would take any terms if the terms included food. Daniel nodded. 3 mountain clans, plus the Kashgaru with their grain in the storehouse, plus Lugal Im, who depend on wool and obsidian. 5. 5 tribes bound by common trade. That is no longer one small tribe. That is a network. Meihyun raised a hand, said quietly that in the mountains there was one more clan, her own, dying, small, but knowing herbs found nowhere else. If they were included in the network, they could supply medicines, and medicines are needed by everyone, always. Daniel looked at her. 6 tribes, if you count Meihyun's clan. A network covering territory from the mountains to the steppe. He said, we need a fair, a place where all meet, regularly, once a moon, neutral territory, the riverbend, our land. One rule, at the fair, no one bears arms. Preparing for the first fair took a month. Daniel sent messengers to all 5 tribes, an invitation, the word of the keeper of the word, Zababa, neutral territory, no weapons, trade by the Enduri's measures, the reference stone, the vessel measure, the cubit of Ninsun, all tablets through Geshti. 2 tribes answered at once, the mountain clan Tish-An, which had nothing to lose, and the small tribe from beyond the hills that had repaid its debt in winter. They remembered. The tablet remembered. The Kashgaru were silent. Gudea sent a messenger back with a question. Why? Daniel sent an answer. Because at the fair, Gudea can sell his surplus at a better price than at home. Because at the fair, there will be highlanders with obsidian and steppe people with salt. Things the Kashgaru usually get with difficulty. Gudea was silent for 3 more days, then sent confirmation. The Lugal Im were harder. Their chief, Doom-Nir, had a reputation for caution and suspicion. He did not like the Enduri, considered them tricksters who could cheat not with their hands, but with words. Daniel sent Lia-san to him. She spoke the language of the southern plains the Lugal Im considered their own. She knew how to be cold and businesslike. She presented the fair not as friendship, but as a deal. You bring copper, you leave with obsidian and wool. You pay only for what you take. No obligations, no oaths, just trade. Doom-Nir thought for 5 days. Then, agreed. Not out of trust. Out of greed. Obsidian was worth twice as much as copper, and he knew it. The fair took place on the 6th moon, at the river bend, on an empty field among 3 old trees. Daniel chose this place because the trees were landmarks, visible from afar, easy to find, easy to remember. In the morning, the first arrived, Highlanders from Tish-An, 4 of them, with sacks of obsidian blanks. After them, the Kashgaru, Gudea in person, with 3 mules loaded with grain and wool. Then the small tribe from beyond the hills, with dried fish and baskets. Then the Lugal Im, 5 sturdy men with copper ingots. Last came Meihyun's people from the mountain clan, 3 old men with sacks of herbs, 23 people from 6 tribes, on an empty field, without weapons. The weapons were stacked at the entrance, under the watch of Enitu's people. 2 slingers and Enitu herself stood by the heap of piled axes and knives with stony faces. No one argued. The rule was clear. Daniel stood in the center. Beside him, Geshti with an armful of wet tablets and writing sticks. Ninsun with the reference stone. Zababa with his presence that made every transaction sacred. Trade began slowly. People were not used to it. They were used to trading one-on-one, face-to-face, with shouting and quarrel. Here, it was different. You want to buy wool from the Kashgaru. You go to Geshti. She weighs the wool on the reference stone, records the weight, records what you give in return. Both press their marks. Zababa nods. The deal is closed. Simple, clean, without shouting. The first hour was sluggish. People shuffled about, sized each other up. Then a Highlander from Tish An came up to a man from Lugal Im. They had never met before. The Highlander showed an obsidian knife. The man from Lugal Im showed a copper ingot. Geshti stood between them, weighed the obsidian, weighed the copper, recorded, marks, the exchange. The Highlander left with copper. The man from Lugal Im left with the knife. Both pleased, because both saw the numbers. Both saw the record. No one cheated anyone. This opened the gates. Within an hour, the field hummed. People went from group to group, examined the goods, asked the price, went to Geshti. She could barely keep up. Nanaya rushed to help. Her fingers flickered over the clay. The numbers fell smooth and fast. By the end of the day, 34 deals had been struck, 34 tablets, each with a double mark, each with weight and quantity, each witnessed by the keeper of the word. The morning after the fair, Daniel found a potsherd. He was digging behind the storehouse, expanding the plot for a new addition. The spade struck something hard. He knelt and cleared the earth with his hands. A piece of fired clay, the size of a palm, flat, smooth on one side. On the other, signs. He raised the sherd to the light and froze. Cuneiform, but wrong, too advanced for this time and place. Symbols that should not be here. Signs for multiplication, for division, a table, part of a multiplication table. 2 times 3, 6. 3 times 4, 12. Neat, even marks. And below, a fragment, a few signs that were not cuneiform. Another language, another script. Daniel brought the sherd closer to his eyes, squinted, and his hands began to shake. Hanja, ancient Korean writing, distorted, simplified, but recognizable. 2 characters. He made out only the first. Remember, or memorize, or keep in memory. The second was worn away, too damaged. He sat in the dust and held the sherd, and his heart pounded so loudly he heard it in his ears. Someone had been here before him. Someone who knew Korean. Someone who knew mathematics. Someone who recorded a multiplication table on clay in a Bronze Age world. Just like him, a traveler from another time. Another traveler, long ago. Judging by the depth of the layer and the state of the clay, generations ago. Maybe 2 generations, maybe 3. He remembered Mei Hyun and her language, remembered Lia Sun and her mother from the Eastern clan, remembered that the mountain clans spoke a mixed language with words that sounded Korean. This someone had gone into the mountains, or come from the mountains. He left a trace, a multiplication table, the most basic tool, like a message, like a seed cast into the earth. Daniel hid the sherd, wrapped it in cloth, and put it away in his hut, under the mat. He did not know what to do with it, not yet. But he knew one thing. He was not the first. And that meant the world was arranged more complexly than he had thought. At night, he lay and listened to the darkness. On the edge of sleep, he heard a voice. A woman's. Quiet. In Korean. You promised to finish the book. I gave you the material. Write. He opened his eyes. Darkness. Silence. Only the crackle of the coals in the hearth. He did not know to whom he had promised. Did not know whose voice it was. Did not know why the voice sounded as if this someone had known him long. Very long ago. He closed his eyes. Did not fall asleep until dawn. The second fair came a moon later. There were more people. 41 from 6 tribes. New faces came. Steppe people from the west, not seen before. They brought salt. White, coarse river salt that cost more than copper. Daniel looked at the crystals in the sack and counted in his head. Salt. A universal preservative. A universal currency in a pre-monetary world. The one who controls salt controls the storage of food. And the one who controls the storage of food controls the winter. He came up to the steppe man, introduced himself, asked where the salt came from. The steppe man looked at him with suspicion. A boy, thin. What was there to talk about with him? But beside him stood Enitu with a knife at her belt and a stony face. And the steppe man became more talkative. He told that the salt was mined from a lake. 3 days' travel west. The lake dried up in summer and left a crust of salt on the shores. They gathered it and carried it for exchange. But they carried little because the road was dangerous. Steppe wolves, bandits from collapsed clans. You could not go without a guard, and there was no one to guard. Daniel listened and saw an opportunity. He proposed. The road people of Enitu would guard a salt caravan, there and back, for a fee, 1/10 of the load. The steppe man squinted, calculated. 1/10 of the salt was not much, but a guard was life. He agreed. The first guard contract for Enitu. The first time the road people worked not by tribe, but by agreement. For a fee. For a stranger. On a tablet. The fair was closing at sunset. People dispersed, pleased, or at least not cheated. Daniel sat on the ground and counted the tablets. 41 deals. More than the first time. The turnover had grown. The word turnover did not exist in the language of these people, but the thing itself already lived. Beside him sat Ninsun, in silence. She came to every fair, stood by the references, watched over order. When someone began to argue about weight, she silently held out the reference stone. The argument ended. Her presence acted like an anchor. Tall, upright, calm. The measure of the world. Daniel turned to her, said he wanted to ask something. She looked at him, waited. He said the fair needed a permanent keeper, a person who would be here every time, who would watch over the rules, who would resolve disputes not by force, but by measure. He asked if she wanted to. Ninsun was silent for a long time, then said she was the daughter of the chief of another tribe, that her place was there. Daniel answered, her place was where she was needed, and she was needed here. Because here, the world is measured by her cubit. She turned away. He saw her fingers tighten on her knees. She said quietly, all my life I was told I was too big, too tall, too noticeable, that a good woman should be small and quiet. And you make me a measure. Daniel answered, because you are a measure. That is not a compliment. It is a fact. She turned to him. Something shone in her eyes. Not tears. Light. She nodded, in one motion, brief and decisive. From that day, she was the keeper of the fair. Summer came into its strength. Heat. Dust. The river grew shallow. The third dry year pressed on everyone. Daniel looked at the fields and saw what everyone saw. The harvest would be meager. But the Enduri had what no one else did. Stores. A storehouse full of grain, wool, and copper. Obsidian from the mountains. Salt from the steppe. Dried fish. Everything recorded on tablets. Everything counted. When the drought struck in earnest, people would come to them, and they would be ready. But first came Enkaru. He appeared at the storehouse at midday, not alone, with 4 men, old warriors, Former. Men who remembered the times when the Enduri were not traders, but hunters. When glory was won by spear and not by tablet. They stood before the storehouse and Enkaru spoke, loudly, for the whole village. He said the boy had turned the tribe into a shop, that warriors had become porters, that women commanded men, that the keeper of the word had become the servant of clay scraps, that the chief father had lost his reason in allowing a sick child to lead the tribe to disgrace. He did not threaten. He did not call for revolt. He simply spoke, but spoke so that all could hear, and the seeds fell on prepared soil. Because many of the men felt the same. Awkwardness, humiliation. Their wives checked the tablets. Their daughters learned to write. Their sons sat with an orphan girl instead of learning to throw a spear. The world had turned over. And Enkaru voiced what many thought but were afraid to say. Daniel stood in the doorway of the storehouse and listened. Did not interrupt. Let Enkaru finish. When he fell silent, Daniel stepped forward. He did not argue, did not defend himself. He said one thing. Uncle Enkaru is a warrior, and that is right. The tribe needs warriors. But, he asked, when did a warrior of the Endori last return with spoils? Silence. When did a warrior of the Endori last win in battle? Silence. When did the tribe last eat its fill in winter, not thanks to the spear, but in spite of it? Enkaru clenched his teeth. Daniel went on. He said the caravan that returned with copper had brought the tribe more than 3 raids, without blood, without losses, without widows and orphans. And he asked, which is more honorable, to kill a stranger and take a sack, or to bring back 10 sacks without killing anyone? One of the old warriors behind Enkaru lowered his eyes. Another took a step back. Enkaru stood alone. His face darkened. He turned and walked away. The men behind him dispersed, quietly, without a word. Daniel stood and watched him go. He had won. Again. With words. But he knew that each such victory made Enkaru more dangerous. A cornered beast does not flee. A cornered beast bites. Daniel acted preemptively. If Enkaru and Lugalbanda were preparing a strike, he had to deprive them of a pretext, or make the strike too costly. He thought for 3 days. On the 4th, he sent Liason to Gudea, not to Lugalbanda, to Gudea, the younger brother, the one who had set the first seal, the one who trusted the tablets. Liason came to Gudea and said a simple thing. In the Enduri's storehouse lies the grain of the Kashgaru, 20 sacks, under Gudea's seal. If any one of the Kashgaru attacks the Enduri, the grain will be lost. 20 sacks, Gudea's grain, his own, under his seal. She did not threaten, did not accuse, simply reminded, a fact, numbers, a tablet. Gudea listened, in silence, then asked one question. Why was she saying this? Liason answered, because friends warn one another. Gudea nodded. Within 2 days, Lugalbanda received from his younger brother a ban on touching the Enduri. Public. Before the elders of the Kashgaru, Gudea said his grain lay in their granary, that an attack on the granary was an attack on his grain, that he would not allow it. Lugalbanda was furious, but he could not stand against his elder brother before the council. Not this time. The first threat retreated, but did not vanish. Enkaru had lost an outside ally, but had not lost his anger. Daniel felt his presence every day. A gaze at his back, a whisper around the corner, men who looked away when Shounen passed by, a slow but constant poison. Daniel decided to stop waiting and to start building what would knock the ground from under Enkaru's feet. He gathered the elders, this time all of them, including Enkaru. and proposed what no one expected: a share in the caravan for all the men of the tribe. Anyone could invest. A sack of grain, a bundle of wool, 10 dried fish, anything. And each would receive his portion of the profit, proportional to the investment, recorded on a tablet under the mark of the keeper of the word. The old, the widows, the maimed, all of them. Even Enkaru, especially Enkaru. Daniel turned to him, said, "Uncle, you will invest and you will receive, like everyone. No more, no less. Buy the tablet." And Karu looked at him, eyes narrow, mouth tight. He understood what was happening. The boy was buying him, not with a bribe, with rules. If he refused the share, he admitted that he had no need of profit. That was absurd. If he accepted, he became part of the system he hated, a trap of silk. He was silent, then muttered that he would think about it. But everyone saw he had not refused. A week later, Enkaru brought 3 sacks of grain and pressed his mark on the tablet, in silence, with the face of a man swallowing a bitter medicine. The caravan went east, 30 bundles of wool and 20 sacks of grain. 22 people invested. For the first time, the tribe pooled capital. Old Shala invested 2 sacks of barley, everything she had. Daniel came to her and asked whether she was sure. Shala looked at him with faded eyes and said her husband had never gone on a caravan, that he had dug the earth all his life and died with empty hands, that she wanted at least once to know what it was like when something comes back. Daniel recorded her investment, 2 sacks of barley, her fingerprint on the clay. When he set the stick to the tablet, his hand trembled slightly. The caravan returned in 14 days, with a load: obsidian, mountain herbs, goat hides. The total profit: 12 stones of copper and 15 bundles of medicinal herbs. Geshti and Nanaya counted for 3 hours, divided the total profit into shares, proportional to each one's investment. Nanaya counted in her head faster than Geshti recorded on clay. Daniel stood beside them and checked. Accuracy was important. An error of 1 handful could destroy the trust built up over months. When the count was ready, Daniel went out to the people, named each investor by name, named his investment, named his share, showed the tablet. Each one came up and took his own. Old Shala received half a stone of copper and 3 bunches of mountain herbs. She held the copper in her palms and looked at it, then pressed it to her chest, like a child. Daniel turned away. His throat tightened. He thought. 2 sacks of barley had turned into copper and medicine for an old woman who had dug the earth all her life, for a woman whose husband had died with empty hands. This was not arbitrage. This was justice. After the distribution of the profit, Enkaru came up to Daniel. He had received his share, a stone and a half of copper, for 3 sacks of grain. A good deal. He stood and looked at the copper, then at his nephew, said nothing, turned and walked away. But he came again a week later with 5 sacks of grain for the next caravan, silently pressed his mark and left. Daniel watched his back and thought, not a victory, not yet a victory, but the first crack in the wall. Summer was ending, the 3rd fair, then the 4th, each larger than the last. At the 4th, there were 56 people. A new good appeared. Clay vessels from Mei Hyun's clan, fine, with a pattern, nothing like it had been seen in the region. Women from all the tribes grabbed the pots and would not let go. Mei Hyun sat beside the pots and smiled quietly. Her clan in the mountains received grain and fish for the pottery. For the first time in 2 years, they ate their fill. Daniel recorded the deals and counted. Mei Hyun had brought 20 pots. Each was worth 2 stones of grain. 40 stones of grain for 20 pots. Her clan lived, did not die out. Lived. At the fifth fair, a dispute occurred, a serious one. A man from Lugal Im accused a Highlander from Tish An of cheating, said the obsidian he had bought cracked within 3 days, that the Highlander had sold a defective stone. The Highlander answered that the stone had been whole, that the buyer had spoiled it himself. Both shouted. People stepped back, put their hands on their belts where their knives usually were. But there were no knives. The rule of the fair. Daniel stepped into the center, asked for silence, turned to Geshti. She found the tablet of the deal, the date, the weight of the obsidian, the marks of both. Daniel took the cracked obsidian, looked. The crack ran from within, a hidden defect. The Highlander could not have known. The buyer could not have checked. No one was to blame. But the deal was spoiled. Daniel proposed. The Highlander returns half the price. The buyer keeps the stone. For the future, he introduced a new rule. Obsidian is checked before sale. A tap with a little hammer. If it rings, it is whole. If it sounds dull, it is defective. The check is done by a third party, not the seller, not the buyer. Geshti, or Nanaya, neutral quality control. Both sides looked at him. The Highlander scratched his beard. The buyer pursed his lips. Then both nodded. The dispute ended. Without blood, without offense. Daniel returned to his place. Mei-hyun handed him a decoction. He drank it and thought. Quality control. Warranty obligations. Neutral arbitration. Third-year course. Autumn brought news. Leah Sun returned from reconnaissance in the south. Grim. Composed. She sat before Daniel and spoke in an even voice. Naram Esh is moving. Slowly. He swallowed 2 marsh clans over the summer. His men now stand 3 days' travel from Lugal Im. He does not attack. He presses. He sends envoys. Offers protection. A tribe either accepts and pays tribute or refuses, and within a moon wakes in the night to the sound of axes. Winter came early, cold, cruel. The river covered with thin ice that cracked in the night like bones. Daniel stood by the storehouse and counted the stores. 73 sacks of grain, 15 bundles of dried fish, 20 ingots of copper, obsidian, salt, herbs. By the measure of the region, the Enduri were rich. By Daniel's measure, this was a safety cushion for 1 winter, no more. If Naram Esh struck in spring, the stores would last 3 moons of siege. If the siege dragged on, they would die. He had to think faster. The first task, Lugal Im. If Doomnir surrendered to Naram Esh, the southern flank would open. Daniel had to give Lugal Im a reason to stay in the network. Not friendship, not an oath. Profit. He sent Leah Sun to Doomnir with an offer. The Enduri would take the Lugal Im's cattle for storage, 20 head of sheep, the same terms as the Kashgaru's grain, 1/10 for storage, a guarantee of return, a tablet with a mark. If Naram Esh attacked Lugal Im, the cattle would be safe on Enduri territory. Doomnir was no fool. He understood. This was not friendship. This was insurance. The boy from the bend was offering to save his herd from the conqueror. The price was laughable. 2 sheep. Doomnir thought for 3 days. On the 4th, he sent 20 sheep with a shepherd and a tablet. The pen beside the storehouse filled, 20 foreign sheep. The men of the Enduri walked past and shook their heads. Foreign sheep on our land. Foreign grain in our granary. The boy gathers foreign goods like a crow gathers shiny stones. Why? Daniel knew why. Every sack of foreign grain was a thread. Every foreign sheep was a thread. The threads wove into a net that could not be cut without losing your own. The Kashgaru would not attack because their grain was in the granary. The Lugal Im would not betray because their sheep were in the pen. The mountain clans would not turn away because the fair was their only source of grain. each one bound, not by rope, by profit. The second task, the school. Geshti was already teaching 14 students, 8 from the Endori, 3 from Ninsun's tribe, 2 from the mountain clan, and Nanaya. They sat in the storehouse every morning and wrote on clay. Signs, numbers, receipts. Daniel added something new. He began teaching them to count, not just to record numbers, but to add, subtract, multiply. He remembered the potsherd with the multiplication table. The one who had been here before him had done the same, taught counting, left a table as a legacy. Daniel took the sherd from under the mat, showed it to Geshti. She looked at the signs, wrinkled her brow, said some were like her signs, but older, others completely foreign. Daniel pointed at the Hanja, asked whether she had seen such signs. Geshti shook her head, but Mei-hyun had seen them. She entered the storehouse at that moment with a flask of decoction, saw the sherd in Daniel's hands, and stopped. Came up, took it, looked for a long time, then said quietly, "This is the writing of her grandmother. Old, from the times when the mountain clan was large, when among them lived a man they called the teacher. He came from no one knew where, spoke a language no one knew, but learned to speak the local tongue faster than children learn to walk. He taught them to count. He taught them to record. He taught them to mix herbs for medicines. And then he died, long ago, 3 or 4 generations back. His name was forgotten, but his signs remained. On pots, on the walls of caves, on tablets that crumbled with time." Daniel listened and his skin crawled with goosebumps. The teacher, another traveler. He had gone into the mountains, found a clan and taught them the same things, counting, writing, herbs. He did the same as Daniel. He built and died, and his legacy crumbled because he did not create a system that would outlive him. Or he created one, but it did not hold. Daniel clenched his jaw. This is why. This is why everything he builds must work without him, because the teacher already tried, and his legacy shrank to a sherd in the earth and a few words in the language of a mountain clan. Not enough. Daniel had to do more. He began by asking Mei-hyun to record all the recipes, every decoction, every salve, every blend, on tablets, with exact measures. Not a handful, but 3 stones. Not a pinch, but half a spoon. Exactly. Verifiable. Repeatable. Mei-hyun sat with Geshti and dictated. Geshti recorded. Slowly. Carefully. Each recipe on a separate tablet, with a drawing of the plant, with a description of where to find it, with an indication of when to gather it. 14 recipes in 2 weeks. 14 tablets. Knowledge that had lived only in the head of one woman now lived in clay. Mei-hyun held the first tablet with a recipe in her hands and was silent, then said quietly, "My clan is dying out. The young leave, the old die. In 10 years we will not exist, but this will remain." She placed the tablet in the storehouse, beside the sacks of grain and the ingots of copper. Daniel watched and thought, the recipes are worth more than copper, more than obsidian, more than everything in this granary. Because copper can be mined, but knowledge that has died cannot be resurrected. Winter pressed on, cold, wind, snow on the peaks. In the storehouse, it was warm. The wormwood smelled dry and bitter. People came and went, took their shares, checked the tablets. The system worked, quietly, without failures, like a clock not yet invented here. In the 6th week of winter, Gudea came, in person, with a guard, 4 warriors. He entered the storehouse and looked around. Tablets in a row on a shelf, sacks neatly stacked, the reference stone on a pedestal, the cubit of Ninsun in a fired case, the vessel measure on a separate shelf, clean, dry, smelling of wormwood. Gudea walked around the storehouse in silence, then sat across from Daniel, looked at him for a long time, and spoke. He said his brother, Lugalbanda, was angry, that Lugalbanda considered Shounen more dangerous than an army, that he wanted to kill the boy and burn the granary. Daniel listened calmly. Gudea went on. He said he himself was also afraid, but afraid not of Shounen, afraid of what would happen if Shounen were gone. Because now the grain of the Kashgaru lay in this granary. Because Nanaya, his daughter, studied here, and for the first time in her life, was happy. Because at the fair, the Kashgaru traded better than ever before, and if all of this vanished, the Kashgaru would lose more than they would gain from a raid. He fell silent, then said one thing. I will restrain my brother as long as I can, but you must understand, Lugal Banda will not stop. He will find a way, or find an ally. Daniel nodded. He knew. Asked what Gudea needed. Gudea answered, safety for his daughter. If something happened, Nanaya must be safe. Daniel looked him in the eyes, said, Nanaya is under the protection of the Enduri, under the protection of the Keeper of the Word, under the protection of the Road People, on a tablet, with my mark. Gudea nodded, rose, shook Daniel's hand, briefly, firmly, and left. Daniel sat and thought. Gudea had just given him the most valuable thing he could, a warning, and a reason to protect not only himself, but his daughter. A thread, another thread in the net. Spring of the second year. Daniel stood before the storehouse and did not recognize it. In a year, it had grown threefold. The main building of fired clay, an addition for the tablets, a separate pen for cattle, a canopy for the fair, Geshti's workshop where she fired tablets. Around the storehouse a village had grown, not the wretched cluster of huts that had been there a year before. A real village, 20 houses, a well, a plot for drying grain. People came to the Enduri, not by raid, on foot, with sacks on their backs. Families from small clans who had heard that at the river bend there was a place where no one is cheated, where a tablet keeps a word, where a widow does not die of hunger. They came and stayed. Daniel accepted everyone. One condition for each. Learn the measures, learn the signs, work, receive a share. The population of the Enduri doubled over the winter. 60 people had become 120. Erdin looked at this and could not believe it. His tribe was growing, for the first time in 10 years. Not because they conquered, because people came to them. Daniel gathered a great council. Not only the Enduri, messengers went to all 6 tribes. An invitation, to the river bend, to the field by the 3 trees. Not a fair, a council, a talk about the future. He had prepared for this for months. Every evening he sat with Geshti and Nanaya and wrote. A large tablet, the size of a human chest. On it were rules, common ones for all the tribes. Common measures, the stone, the vessel, the cubit of Ninsun. Common rules of trade. Every deal through a tablet, the marks of both parties, a witness, common rules of debt, return with an addition by the deadline. A violator loses the right to trade at the fair. A common rule of the fair, no weapons. Whoever breaks it loses his share in the common caravan for a year. A common name, Shar-En, those who keep their word. The chiefs arrived, not all at once. Gudea first, with Nanaya, who rushed to Geshti and chattered without stopping. Then the chief of the mountain clan, Tishan, old, bent, with the eyes of an eagle. Then the chief of the small tribe from beyond the hills, young, nervous. Then Doomnir from Lugal Im, last, wary, with a guard, glancing around. The steppe people sent a representative, not a chief, an elder. Meihyun's clan sent her herself. She was their voice. 7 groups, at one fire on neutral ground. Daniel stepped into the center. Ninsun supported him on one side, Initu on the other. He was pale, thin, coughing, but he stood straight. He did not speak long. He showed the tablet, the large one, with the rules, with the name. Shar-en, those who keep their word, he said. Each of you traded at the fair. Each saw how the tablets work. Each knows that his grain or his copper or his sheep are safe, because there is a record, because there is a measure, because there is a witness, he said. In the South, a man is coming who takes by force, who does not ask but seizes, who does not record but remembers, and forgets when it suits him. He will come here, not tomorrow, but soon. And when he comes, each tribe alone will fall, like a stalk under the wind. But stalks bound into a sheaf stand. He laid the tablet on a stone in the center of the circle, said, "Whoever wants to be a sheaf, set your seal. Whoever does not want to may leave, without offense, without enmity, but without protection." Silence. The fire crackled. The wind carried the smell of wormwood and river water. Gudea rose first, came to the tablet, took out his bone cylinder, looked at Daniel, at Nanaya, who stood at the edge of the circle with shining eyes, pressed the seal, pressed it into the clay, sat back down. The chief of Tishan rose second, slowly. His old knees creaked. He came and set a mark. Not a cylinder, a ring. An old copper ring with a pattern. The chief of the small tribe sprang up, quickly, nervously. A fingerprint. He had no seal. Daniel said, "Geshti will make a seal for anyone who asks." The chief nodded. The steppe people's representative came up unhurriedly. A mark. Meihyun came up quietly. A mark. Doomnir sat, did not move. Everyone turned to him. He was the last, the most cautious, the most suspicious. He looked at the tablet, at the seals, at the name, Shar-en, then rose, slowly, came up, stopped, looked at Daniel, said, "If this is a cheat, I will burn your storehouse and everything in it." Daniel answered, "If this is a cheat, I will help you set it alight." Doomnir grunted. Something twitched in his stony face. He set his seal. 6 seals. 1 remained. Erdan, the father, the chief of the Enduri. He sat and was silent throughout the council. Daniel turned to him. The father rose slowly. Every movement cost him effort. He was old, weak, stooped. But when he went to the tablet, his back straightened. The first step, the second, the third. He walked, and with every step, something changed in him, as if every step lifted a stone from his shoulders. The shame of years of weakness, the shame of grain given up, the shame of the neighbor's laughter. He came to the tablet and took it in his hands, looked, ran a finger over the seals, over the names, over the rules his son had written, then pressed his own seal, old, wooden, with a simple pattern. And when he raised his head, he had the eyes of a young man. For the first time in 10 years, he stood straight, completely straight. Daniel looked at his father and his throat tightened. He thought, this is what it was for. Not for the tablets, not for the measures, not for the caravans, for this moment, so that an old man could stand straight again. The fire crackled. Geshti sobbed at the edge of the circle. She clutched her writing stick and recorded the names in the large clay book. Her hands trembled, but the signs were even, as always. Mei-hyun began to sing, quietly, in that language Daniel recognized and could not name. Korean passed through generations. No one understood the words, but the melody was warm and sad, and everyone fell silent and listened. Ninsen stood beside the storehouse, looked at the case with the reference cubit, at her cubit, which had become a measure, and on her lips was a smile. Quiet, for the first time. Leah Sun stood in the darkness at the edge of the fire. The light fell on half her face. The scar through her eyebrow gleamed. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, quickly, so no one would see. Nanaya jumped up and declared to the whole circle, "When I grow up, I will teach this to everyone in the Kashgaru." Gudea looked at his daughter and for the first time did not tell her to be quiet. Everyone laughed, a warm laugh, not at her, with her. Initu stood behind Daniel, in silence, as always. She put a hand on the hilt of her knife, not for battle, as an oath. She swore in silence, and no one heard, but Daniel felt it. The Shar-En Union lasted 12 days before they tried to destroy it. On the 13th day, Leah Sun came running from the south, gasping, with a split lip. She fell at the entrance of the storehouse and said 3 words. Lugal-im surrendered. Doomnir had accepted Naram Esh's offer, tribute, submission. The warriors of Lugal-im entered the conqueror's host. 20 sheep in the Enduri's pen were all that remained of their independence. Doomnir had sold his freedom for a promise of safety, and Naram Esh's first order, through Doomnir, was to tear up all agreements with the Enduri and take the sheep back. A messenger would arrive tomorrow. Daniel stood and listened. Beside him, Ninsun, Enitu, Geshti, Mei-hyun, his council, his people. He saw fear on their faces, not panic, a quiet, grown fear. The fear of people who know that the worst is possible. He closed his eyes. 3 seconds. Opened them. Said, "The Lugal-im's sheep lie on our tablet, under our seal. Doomnir set his mark. If he wants to take them, let him come himself and take them. By the rules. We do not refuse. We return. Buy the tablet, with a deduction for storage, 2 sheep. And let all of Shar-En see that the Enduri keep their word, even when a partner betrays." Enitu asked, "And if they come not for the sheep, but with axes?" Daniel answered, "Then the road people do what they were made for." But he did not believe Naram Esh would strike now. Naram Esh was clever. He did not destroy what he could absorb. He first isolated, then pressed, then offered protection. The messenger from Lugal-im came the next morning, a young warrior with insolent eyes. He stood before Erdan and said that Doomnir demanded the return of the sheep, immediately, without conditions. Erdan turned to his son. Daniel stepped forward. He said the sheep would be returned, in full order, as recorded on the tablet, -2 for storage, as agreed. So it would be. The messenger smirked, said Doomnir no longer paid boys. Daniel answered calmly, "Doomnir does not pay boys. Doomnir pays the keeper of the word, and the tablet, and his own mark on it. Or does Doomnir wish to say that his mark means nothing, that his word is worth nothing? Let him say it before everyone, before Gudea, before the Highlanders, before the steppe people. Let everyone learn that Doomnir's word can be wiped away like clay." The messenger fell silent. He had not expected this. He had expected fear, submission. The boy was supposed to be frightened. The boy was not frightened. The messenger took 18 sheep, not 20. 18. 2 remained as payment for storage. Buy the tablet. He left angry. Daniel knew this was not the end. This was the beginning. 3 days later, Lugalbanda struck. Not against the Endori, against the caravan. The caravan was coming from the mountain clan Tish-An with obsidian. 6 men, 2 mules, and Nitu's guard, 3 fighters. Lugalbanda sent 15 warriors, an ambush at the ford. The caravan was caught off guard. 2 of the caravan men were wounded, 1 mule killed, the obsidian taken. And Nitu's people fought. Kiana, the widow fighter, broke the arm of one of the attackers. But there were 3 of them against 15. They were crushed, bound, left on the road, alive. This was a message. We can, whenever we want. And Nitu learned of it by evening. She came to Daniel and her face was white. Not from fear, from rage. She spoke quietly, too quietly. She said her people were on the road, wounded, bound, that the caravan was robbed, that Lugalbanda had spat on the agreement, that she wanted to gather all the road people and strike back. Daniel listened. He understood her. In another life, he would have agreed. But here a counterstrike meant war, and war meant the end. 15 of Lugalbanda's warriors against 12 of Anitu's road people. The math was simple. They would lose. He said no. Anitu clenched her fists. He said, "We will not strike. We will do worse. We will show all of Sharen that Lugalbanda broke the law of the fair, that he robbed a common caravan, that he struck at the trade of all, not only ours. The Highlanders lost obsidian. The steppe people lost a buyer of obsidian. The Kashgaru lost trust in the road. One raid by Lugalbanda struck 5 tribes, and 5 tribes will be angry, not at us, at him." Daniel called an emergency council of Sharen. Messengers went out that same evening. In 5 days, representatives of 5 tribes gathered at the fire, without Lugal-Im. They had left the Union. Daniel stood before them and showed the tablet, the large Union tablet, with 7 seals, one of them Dumnir's seal. He said, "The Lugal-Im broke the rules. Their warriors attacked a common caravan, wounded people, stole goods, obsidian that belonged to the Highlanders of Tish-An." He asked, "What does the law of Sharen say?" Gudea answered first. "The law says a violator loses the right to trade at the fair for a year." Daniel nodded, but added, "Not only the fair." He proposed, "Not a single tribe of Sharen trades with Lugal-Im. No one. Not grain, not wool, not copper, not salt. Until the obsidian is returned. Until the wounded receive compensation. Until Lugalbanda comes to the fire and brings an apology, an embargo." There was no such word, but everyone understood the substance. The chief of Tish-An nodded first. His obsidian, his loss. The steppe people nodded. Without Lugal-Im, they still got salt through the Endori. The small tribe nodded. Gudea thought longer. Lugalbanda was his brother. But Gudea looked at Nanaya, who sat beside Geshti, at his daughter, who for the first time in her life was happy, and nodded. 5 tribes against 1. Not by war, by silence. Trade silence. The Lugal-Im could make war, but to eat in winter without the Kashgaru's grain, and without the steppe people's salt, and without the Highlanders' obsidian, they could not. Lugalbanda brought not only himself, he brought information. He sat by the fire and spoke for 2 hours about Naram Esh, about his army, about his way of absorbing tribes. Daniel listened, and Leah's son listened beside him, and exchanged glances with him when Lugal Banda confirmed what she had learned in reconnaissance. Naram Esh had 400 warriors. The number had grown over the winter. 7 clans under his hand. He was moving north, slowly, absorbing. His method was simple: an envoy, an offer, tribute, or war. Small tribes agreed. Those who refused vanished in a single night. Lugal Banda said Naram Esh knew about Sharen. His spies reported. He had not yet decided what to do. He was not used to what he did not understand. An army he understood. A tablet he did not. Daniel thought for 3 days, then called a council. The full one. All the chiefs, all the elders. Lugal Banda beside Gudea. The brothers sat shoulder to shoulder, and that meant more than any speech. Daniel laid out a map, a clay one. He had made it for a week. The river, the bend, all the tribes of Sharen, Naram Esh's positions, arrows, directions, distances in days of travel. He said, Naram Esh has 400 warriors. Sharen has 120. If you count Anytu's road people and the warriors of the Kashgaru and the hunters of the Highlanders and the young men of all the tribes. 400 against 120. He would not lie. In open battle, they would lose. Lugal Banda nodded. The first time he agreed with the boy without resistance. Daniel went on. But Naram Esh cannot make war indefinitely. 400 warriors are 400 mouths. Every day, every month. His supply is poor, his stores leak, his storekeepers steal. Liasan confirmed. 1/3 of his stores are lost to theft and rot. If the war drags on for 2 months, his army will begin to starve. He cannot afford a long war. Daniel placed 3 pebbles on the map. Positions, he said. We will not make war. We will make war too costly. The first stone, the storehouse. All the goods of all the tribes of Shar-En are brought to the Enduri's storehouse, one place, fortified, guarded. If Naram Esh wants grain, he must take the storehouse. And the storehouse is not a village that can be burned in a night. It is walls, a guard, stores for 3 months. Enitu said she would fortify the walls in 2 weeks. Clay and stone, a moat. Not a fortress, but enough to slow him down. The second stone, information. Liasan's scouts would watch every movement of Naram Esh, every day, every detachment, every baggage train. If he marched on Shar-En, they would know 3 days in advance. 3 days is time to hide the people and cattle in the mountains, to carry off the valuable, to leave empty villages. Naram Esh would come and find emptiness. No grain, no cattle, no people. Nothing. And his army would eat empty land. The third stone, negotiations. Daniel said, when Naram Esh realizes that taking us by force is costly, he will send an envoy. And then we will show him the numbers. How much it costs to destroy Shar-En. How much he will lose if the trade stops. How much his own tributaries lose from the fair closing. Because at the fair, it is not only our people who trade. At the fair, people from his territories trade too. They come, buy, sell. If the fair vanishes, his people grow poor, and poor people are angry people. Angry people do not pay tribute. The chiefs listened. Lugal Banda, for the first time in his life, listened to a plan in which there was not a single axe blow, and nodded. Gudea looked at his nephew and slowly smiled. Dunir was absent. He had stayed with Naram Esh. His place stood empty at the fire, a reminder. Erden sat and listened, in silence. His eyes shone, not from tears, from pride. When Daniel finished, the father rose, said one phrase, "My son speaks. I listen. Do as he says." Silence. Then Gudea slapped his knee, rose, said, "The Kashgaru give 20 warriors to guard the storehouse." Lugal Banda rose, said, "My 15 fighters are the best on the river. They will stand beside the road people." The chief of Tishan stood, said the Highlanders knew the trails through the passes. If they needed to flee, they would lead them. Meihyun said her clan would give refuge in the mountain caves, for women and children, for the old, for the tablets. Daniel turned to her. For the tablets, yes, the tablets must be saved first, not the grain, not the copper, the tablets, because grain can be grown, copper can be mined, but records cannot be restored. Meihyun nodded. She understood. She knew what had happened to the teacher's legacy when his tablets crumbled. 2 weeks boiled with work. Anitu commanded the building of the walls, clay, stone, sod. A moat waist deep, not a fortress, but an obstacle. The road people and the warriors of the Kashgaru worked side by side. For the first time, men who a year before had wanted to kill each other now needed clay in the same moat. Lugal Banda stood beside Anitu, and they argued about the thickness of the walls. He said thicker, she said higher. They settled on a compromise, medium thickness and medium height. When they finished, both were caked in mud, and both, for the first time, looked at each other without hostility. Naram Esh's envoy came at the beginning of summer, alone, without a guard. This in itself was a message. Naram Esh is so powerful that his envoy needs no protection. The envoy was old, dry, with a shaved head and eyes that had seen too much. He entered the Enduri's village and stopped, looked around, at the walls, at the storehouse, at the road people by the gate, at the tablet with the fair's rules that hung on a post by the entrance. He smiled, thinly, like a man who sees a curious thing and assesses its worth. Daniel received him in the storehouse, not by the fire, not in a hut, in the storehouse, among the sacks and tablets and references. This, too, was a message. Here is our strength, not swords, not spears, clay and grain and order. The envoy sat on a bench. Daniel sat across from him. Beside him, Leah's son, the interpreter. Though the envoy spoke the language of the river that everyone understood, Leah's son's presence meant that Daniel knew more about Naram Esh than the envoy thought. The envoy began, courteously. He conveyed a greeting from Naram Esh, the great Naram Esh, unifier of the marshes, protector of the weak. He said Naram Esh had heard of the wisdom of the young chief at the bend, of his tablets, of his fair. Naram Esh was impressed. Naram Esh would like to offer protection, his protection, strong, reliable, in exchange for a modest tribute, grain, copper, cattle. And the boy chief would of course continue his admirable work, under Naram Esh's wing, under his wise guidance. Daniel listened, did not interrupt. When the envoy finished, he was silent, then spoke. He did not say no. He did not say yes. He said, "Tell me about the price." The envoy blinked, repeated, "The price." Daniel nodded. He said, "Every decision has a price. Naram Esh's protection has a price. Tribute, loss of freedom, loss of control over trade. But war too has a price, for both sides. He would like to discuss both prices, openly, with numbers." The envoy inclined his head. He was not used to this. Usually tribes either agreed or grabbed for spears. The boy was offering to count. Daniel took out tablets, laid them before the envoy. He said, "The Shounen fair brings 6 tribes an income equal to 300 stones of grain a year, plus copper, plus obsidian, plus salt, plus medicines. Total turnover, about 500 stones in terms of grain. If Naramesh destroys the fair, he loses 500 stones of turnover. Not for Sharen, for everyone, including the people from Naramesh's territory who already trade at the fair. 12 people from 3 of his tributaries came to the last fair. He showed a tablet, names, marks, goods. Naramesh's people traded here, bought obsidian and salt and herbs. If the fair closes, they lose the source. They will be angry. Angry tributaries are unreliable tributaries. The envoy looked at the tablets, then at Daniel, then at the tablets again. He said, "You are proposing what?" Daniel answered, "I am proposing that destroying Sharen is more costly than leaving Sharen in peace. I am proposing that it is more profitable for Naramesh to trade with us than to make war. I propose to open the fair to his people, freely, without restrictions, by our measures, by our tablets. They come, trade, leave. Naramesh gets prospering tributaries who do not starve and pay tribute on time. We get safety. Everyone gets trade." The envoy was silent for a long time. He was used to 2 answers, yes or no, submission or war. The boy had offered a third, neither submission nor war, a deal. The envoy rose, said he would convey the words to Naram Esh, and left. Daniel sat in the storehouse after he had gone and looked into emptiness. Leah's son came up, sat down beside him, asked, "Do you think he will agree?" Daniel answered, "I don't know, but I gave him what he did not expect. Numbers. He will see the figures and understand, or not understand, and then we will have to find another way." Leah's son was silent, then said quietly, "You know that if he does not agree, we will not hold out." Daniel nodded. "I know." She said still more quietly, "Then why? Why all of this, if it can be lost?" Daniel turned to her, looked into her eyes, dark, weary, with the scar through the eyebrow. He said, "Because if you do not try, you certainly lose. But if you try, then maybe." She looked at him, then did what she had never done. She laid her head on his shoulder for 1 second, then straightened and left. Daniel sat and listened to his heartbeat, fast, not from the cough. Everyone was against it. Anitu said it was a trap. Lugobanda said it was madness. Erden said he would not let his son go. Ninsun was silent, but her face said everything. Meihyun said he was too ill for the journey. Gudea said Naram Esh would kill him and say the boy died of his cough. Even Zababa raised his head and said the keeper of the word could not witness a deal with a man he had not seen. Everyone was against it. Daniel listened to each one, then said, "If I do not go, Naram Esh will decide that I am afraid. If I am afraid, then I am weak. If I am weak, then Shar-En is weak, and he will come. Not with an envoy, with 400 warriors. I go because I must show that I am not afraid, that Shar-En is not afraid. That we stand before him not because we have nothing to lose, but because we have something to defend." He left at dawn, not alone. Anitu walked beside him. He could not refuse her. She said, "You go without me only over my corpse." He looked at her face and understood she was not joking. Leah's son walked ahead, the scout, the eyes and ears. She knew the road. She knew Naram Esh's territory. She would guide them. 3. A thin boy with a cough, a warrior woman with 2 knives, a woman with a scar through her eyebrow, a caravan of 3 people, without goods, without mules, only them and the road. The journey took 4 days. Daniel walked slowly. His body failed him. By the evening of the first day, he was gasping. Mei-hyun had given him a supply of decoction for the road. He drank it, bitter. It helped. At night, they slept under the open sky. Enitu did not sleep, sat beside him with a knife on her knees, keeping watch. Lia-sun also did not sleep. She lay in the dark with open eyes and listened to the step. On the second day, Daniel spoke. He walked beside Lia-sun and spoke quietly. He told her of the potsherd, of the Hanja, of the teacher who had lived in the mountain clan. She listened in silence, then said, her mother had told her stories, of a man who came from the east, who spoke a language no one knew, who taught them to count. Her mother called him Sonsa, teacher, in the language that passed from mother to daughter, Korean. Daniel stopped. Sonsa, Sonsengnim, teacher, in Korean, distorted, shortened, but recognizable. He stood on the dusty road and felt something clench in his chest. Another Daniel, another Korean scholar. Maybe not a scholar, maybe just a man who knew mathematics and Korean and ended up here the same as he had. Fell, struck his head, opened his eyes in a foreign body, and tried to change the world. And failed. Or succeeded, but it proved not enough. His legacy crumbled into potsherds and fragments of words. Daniel walked on, in silence, with a new weight in his heart. The meeting was set at the confluence of 2 streams, neutral ground, no one's. Daniel arrived first, sat on a stone by the water, waited. Enitu stood behind him. Lia-sun vanished into the bushes. Invisible, just in case. Naramesh came an hour later, alone, as promised. Daniel saw him and understood why he was feared. He was huge. Not fat, huge. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that could bend a copper rod. A face dark from the sun. A short beard. Intelligent eyes. Not evil, intelligent. That was worse. An evil enemy can be outwitted. A clever one is hard. Naramesh sat across from him, looked at Daniel, at the thin body, at the sunken cheeks, at the hands that trembled with exhaustion after 4 days on the road. He said, I expected to see a giant. Daniel answered, giants break things. I build. For that, a large body is not needed. Naramesh grinned. He said he had seen the tablets. His spies had brought a few. He had not understood the signs, but he had understood the idea. Recording. Memory that does not die. He said it was a dangerous thing, more dangerous than a spear, because a spear kills one, but a tablet remembers for everyone, and the one who remembers for everyone has power over everyone. Daniel listened. Naram-Esh understood more than he had thought. That was both good and bad. Good because with a clever man, one can come to terms. Bad because a clever man sees the threat. Daniel answered, a tablet does not give power. A tablet gives order. Power belongs to the one who decides. Order belongs to the one who records. These are different things. Naram-Esh can decide. Shar-En can record. And both win. Naram-Esh inclined his head, thought, then asked directly, what do you want? Daniel answered just as directly, safety, for Shar-En, for the fair, for the trade. Naram-Esh does not touch the Bend. The Bend trades with everyone, including Naram-Esh's people. Everyone grows rich, everyone eats, no one dies. Naram-Esh looked at him for a long time, then said, and what do I get? Daniel answered, a system he proposed. Let Naramesh send people, young ones, those who can learn. Daniel would teach them the tablets, the measures, accounting. Naramesh would know how much grain was in his stores, how much his storekeepers steal, how much he loses from poor storage. A third. He loses a third. That is hundreds of sacks of grain. If Naramesh allows his people to be taught the tablets, he saves that third. Without war, without raids, just by recording. He returned to the bend on the sixth day. Mei Hyun was waiting at the gate. She saw him on Anytu's back and her face went white. She took him into the hut. For 3 days he lay and drank decoctions and did not rise. His mother sat beside him and held his hand. As then, on the first day, when he opened his eyes in a foreign body, the circle had closed. But now it was not only his mother who sat beside him. Geshti came with tablets, showed the records, asked advice, left and returned. Nanaya ran in and told the latest news. She spoke without stopping, and her voice made the hut warmer. Mei Hyun changed the dressings and gave decoctions and sang in the evenings, quietly, in Korean. Words that Daniel understood. A lullaby about a child falling asleep under the stars. Daniel lay and listened, and for the first time in a long while, did not think of plans. He simply listened. On the fourth day he rose, slowly, went outside. The sun struck his eyes. He squinted, and saw his world. The storehouse with strong walls. Beside it, Geshti's workshop, where the firing fire smoked. A pen for cattle. A plot for the fair. Houses, many houses. People, many people. Children ran among the huts. A woman carried a pot of water. A man sharpened an obsidian knife. By the storehouse stood a roadman, upright, with a sling on his shoulder. Daniel looked and counted. Not sacks and not ingots. People. 150, maybe more. A year ago, there had been 60 here. Thin, hungry, frightened. Now, 150. Well-fed, busy, not frightened. He walked to the storehouse, slowly, his legs weak, but he walked on his own. At the entrance, Ninsun met him. She stood at her post, tall, upright, with a calm face. She looked at him. He looked at her. She took a step forward and took his hand, simply took it, as if it were the most natural movement in the world. He did not let go. They stood at the entrance of the storehouse and were silent. And this silence was louder than any words. 2 weeks later, Naram Esh's students came. 10 young men, sturdy, wary. They looked at the storehouse with suspicion, at the tablets with incomprehension, at Geshti with astonishment. A girl teaching men? In their world, this was unthinkable. Geshti looked at them, calmly, without fear, took a stick and clay and began the lesson. As always, evenly, patiently, one sign per lesson. Within a week, 2 of the 10 were smiling. Within 2, all 10 were recording numbers. Crooked, uneven, but correct. Nanaya helped, ran among the students, corrected, praised, scolded. One of the students looked at her with respect. For the first time, respect for a girl. A small shift in a vast world. Daniel sat in a corner and watched. Knowledge was going beyond Shar-En, into Naram Esh's territory. This was by design. When the tablets came to his lands, they would change his people. Slowly, imperceptibly, as a river changes a bank. People who can record are harder to cheat. People who can count are harder to rob, even by their own ruler, even by Naram Esh. This was a seed, cast into foreign soil. It would sprout. In a year, in 10, in a generation, but it would sprout. Summer went on. The fairs grew. The 6th fair gathered 70 people from 8 groups. 8. 2 new, from Naramesh's territory. His tributaries came to trade, with tablets. Clumsy, crooked, but tablets. Daniel stood at the edge of the fair and watched as the conqueror's people bought obsidian from the Highlanders by the measures of Shar-en, the reference stone, the vessel measure, the cubit of Ninsun. His system worked beyond his union. It lived by itself, without him. He began preparing successors, not one, several. Geshti would become keeper of the records and a teacher. She was already better than he. Her signs were more precise, her system of storing tablets more logical. Nanaya would return to the Kashgaru and open a school there. She promised, loudly, before everyone, as always. Lia-san would lead reconnaissance and the trade routes. She knew every trail from the mountains to the marshes. Enitu would continue leading the road people. They were growing. 20 people, the best guard in the region. Ninsun would remain keeper of the fair, the measure of the world. Mei-hyun would heal and record. Her library of recipes already numbered 32 recorded remedies. 32 tablets of knowledge that once lived only in a single head. Each of them could continue without him. This was the main thing. Not the granary, not the tablets, not the measures. People. People who had understood the principle and could pass it on. A system that did not depend on one man. The teacher Sonsa had not created such a system. His knowledge died with him. It remained only in potsherds and fragments of language. Daniel had to do otherwise. He looked at the potsherd that still lay under his mat, took it out, turned it in his hands. 2 characters. Remember. And the second, worn away. He showed the sherd to Mei-hyun. She looked for a long time, then said quietly, the second sign. She had seen it in childhood, on the wall of the cave where her clan lived. She remembered. The second sign meant pass on. Remember and pass on. A message from the teacher, through generations, through crumbled clay and a forgotten language. Remember and pass on. Daniel clenched the sherd, put it back. He would pass it on. He was already passing it on. Autumn of the second year. A great fire. All the tribes of Sharen. New faces, old friends. 2 of Naramesh's students stayed. They asked to. Naramesh allowed it. They sat by the fire beside the Highlanders of Tish-An and ate dried fish and discussed the price of obsidian. Former enemies, at one fire. Daniel stood at the edge of the circle, Ninsun beside him, her hand on his hand, warm. He said to her quietly, I want to ask something. She looked at him. He said, stay, with me, not as keeper of the fair, as a wife. She was silent, for a long time, then said, I thought you would never ask. He smiled, for the first time in a long while. For real. She did not smile. She simply squeezed his hand tighter. That was better than any smile. The wedding was quiet, by the custom of the tribe. Fire, the keeper of the word, the marks of both on a tablet. Zababa witnessed, Geshti recorded, Nanaya wept for joy, loudly, for the whole circle. Mei-hyun sang her Korean song. Lia-sun stood at the edge. Her face was calm. Only her eyes shone. She came up to Daniel after the ceremony, said quietly, You chose right. He looked at her. She turned away and left. He wanted to say something, found no words. Enitu came up last, stood before him, looked into his eyes, then laid her knife on the ground before his feet. An old custom, the blade at the feet of the one you serve. Daniel bent down, picked up the knife, held it back out to her, hilt forward, said, I do not need your oath. I need you, beside me. Enitu took the knife, nodded. 2 movements. Everything said. The shortest explanation in this story. Winter came mild, for the first time in 4 years. Rains. The rivers filled. The earth drank its fill. The harvest would be good. The storehouse full. 8 tribes. 3 fairs before the year's end. Naram Esh's students returned to him with tablets and signs and began to record his stores. Naram Esh sent a messenger, a short tablet. A third of the grain was found. The thieves wept. The boy was right. Daniel read it and grinned. The system worked even there. The last evening of this story. Daniel sat by the fire, Ninsun beside him, her head on his shoulder, his hand on her hand. He looked at the fire. The cough came. Quiet, familiar. He pressed his palm to his mouth. Looked. Clean. Today without blood. A good day. Around the fire sat his people. Geshti was explaining something to a new student, patiently, evenly. Her hands moved precisely and surely. Nanaya argued with a Highlander about the price of goat hides, loudly, eagerly, with a sparkle in her eyes. Liasun sat a little apart, writing something on a tablet, a report on the roots. Her scar gleamed in the firelight. Meihyun sorted herbs, humming quietly, in Korean, words that Daniel understood. A lullaby, about a child falling asleep under the stars. Enitu stood at the edge of the light, as always, with a knife at her belt, with a straight back, eyes into the darkness, keeping watch, always keeping watch. Erden sat by his fire, upright, quiet, with the face of a man who had finally ceased to be ashamed. Enkaru sat beside him, in silence. He had never become a friend, but he had ceased to be an enemy. That was enough. Zababa dozed by the fire, the old keeper of the word. His memory now lived not only in his head, it lived in clay, in hundreds of tablets, in signs that would outlast both him and Daniel, and everyone who sat by this fire. Daniel looked at the fire and thought. In his past life, he had written 200 pages about how markets arise before states. 1,500 readers, 3 citations in a year. He had died on an icy staircase by the subway, and his last thought was that he had not even finished the book. Now he sat by a fire in a Bronze Age world, with a wife whose cubit had become a measure, with a student whose fingers created writing, with a healer whose recipes would outlive generations, with a scout whose eyes saw beyond the horizon, with a warrior woman whose knives defended not with blood but with presence, with a father who finally stood straight, with a union of 7 tribes, with a conqueror who chose to count instead of to kill, with a tablet in the center of the circle on which was written Shar En, those who keep their word. The book was finished, not on paper, on clay, not in ink, in marks, not for 1,500 readers, for this whole world. And it would live, not because he was a genius, but because he was attentive. He saw a girl with clay on her fingers and made her a teacher. He saw a woman too tall for her world and made her a measure. He saw an orphan with numbers in her head and gave her a future. He saw a healer with a dying clan and gave her clay to record. He saw a scout who trusted no one and asked her opinion. He saw a warrior without a war and gave her a war without blood. Every great innovation was care for one person, which happened to prove useful to thousands. And when people understood this, they followed him, not because he was clever, because he was attentive. On the edge of sleep, he again heard the voice, a woman's, Korean, quiet and warm. You finished it. Thank you. He did not know to whom the voice belonged, did not know why he had been sent here, did not know whether he would ever return. But he knew one thing. The potsherd under the mat said, "Remember and pass on." He remembered, and he passed it on. The fire crackled. Ninsun breathed evenly beside him. The stars burned over the river bend, and the world smelled of wormwood.